Picture a quiet English village, Chipping Cleghorn, where a strange newspaper ad announces a murder at Little Paddocks. When a gunman storms in, lights go out and blood spills. It's just the start. 3 deaths, shot, poisoned, strangled, rock, the town, and secrets unravel. Who's the killer hiding among friends? Enter Miss Marple, a sharp-eyed old lady knitting her way to the truth. She uncovers Charlotte Blacklock's deadly lie, a fake identity tied to a fortune, and saves Philippa, the real heir. In 30 seconds, dive into a world of betrayal, clues, and justice, where no secret stays buried. Chapter 1. The Curious Announcement. The morning sun peeked through the curtains of Chipping Cleghorn, a sleepy village where nothing much ever happened. The air smelled of damp grass and fresh bread from the bakery down the lane. People moved, slowly, chatting over garden fences or hurrying to the grocer's before the best apples were gone. It was Friday, October 29th, and the village buzzed with its usual routine until the Gazette arrived. Mrs. Finch, who ran the post office, was the first to notice. She flipped through the Chipping Cleghorn Gazette, her fingers smudged with ink, looking for the crossword. Instead, her eyes caught a strange little box on the classifieds page, tucked between an ad for a used bicycle and a notice about missing chickens. She read it twice, her eyebrows climbing higher each time. "A murder is announced," the ad said in bold letters, "and will take place on Friday, October 29th, at Little Paddocks at 6:30 p.m. Friends accepted, please. No invitation necessary." Mrs. Finch blinked. A murder? At Little Paddocks? That was Letitia Blacklock's house, the big place at the edge of the village with ivy crawling up its walls. Letitia was a sensible woman, not the sort to play silly games. Mrs. Finch adjusted her glasses and read it again, half expecting the words to change. They didn't. She hurried to the counter, waving the paper at young Billy, who was sorting mail. "Billy, look at this." A murder announced, clear as day. What's Miss Blacklock up to? Billy, barely 16 and always eager for gossip, grabbed the paper. His eyes widened. Blimey, sounds like a party, don't it? Like one of the mystery games rich folk play. Bet they'll have costumes and all. Mrs. Finch frowned. It's odd, Billy. No one announces a murder for fun. Not in Chipping Cleghorn. By noon, the Gazette had spread through the village like wildfire. At the butcher's, Mrs. Harmon, the vicar's wife, clutched her copy and whispered to Miss Hinchcliffe, who raised a sceptical eyebrow. At the tea shop, old Mrs. Weatherby read the ad aloud to her friend Miss Murgatroyd, who giggled nervously. Everyone had the same question. What did it mean? Was it a joke, a game, or something else entirely? At Little Paddocks, Letitia Blacklock sat at her breakfast table, unaware of the storm brewing. She was a tall woman in her late 50s, with neat grey hair and a sharp gaze that missed nothing. Her home was cosy but grand, with polished wood floors and old paintings on the walls. She sipped her tea, scanning the Gazette, when her friend, Dora Bunner, burst into the room, waving the paper like a flag. "Letty! Letty! Have you seen this?" Dora's voice was high and wobbly, like a bird caught in a net. She was a fluttery woman, older than Letitia, with messy brown hair and a habit of forgetting where she'd put her glasses. "It says a murder's happening here, tonight, at our house." Letitia took the paper, her lips pressing into a thin line. She read the ad slowly, her fingers tightening on the page. "A murder is announced. she murmured. "What nonsense! Is this? It's not nonsense," Dora said, flapping her hands. "It's in print. Everyone's talking about it." Mrs. Finch called, and Mrs. Harmon, and even that nosy Mrs. Swettenham. They all think it's some kind of party. "Are you planning a party, Letty? You didn't tell me." Letitia shook her head. "I didn't place this ad bunny." She used Dora's old nickname, softening her tone. "It's probably a prank. Some fool with too much time on their hands." Dora's eyes widened. "But what if it's real? What if someone's planning to murder someone?" "Here, don't be ridiculous," Letitia said, though her voice had a slight edge. She stood and smoothed her skirt. "I'll call the Gazette office and sort this out. Probably a mix-up with the printing." But the Gazette office had no answers. The clerk, a nervous man named Mr. Tuttle, stammered that the ad had been paid for in cash, dropped off in an envelope with no name. "It's all proper, Miss Blacklock," he said over the phone. "We thought it was your doing. Sounded like a bit of fun." "Fun?" Letitia snapped. "It's not fun to scare people." She hung up, her mind racing. Who would do this, and why her house? By afternoon, the village was alive with chatter. At the Bluebird Tea Room, Miss Hinchcliffe, a sturdy woman who raised pigs and wore men's boots, leaned across a table to Miss Murgatroyd. "It's a stunt," she said gruffly. "Letitia's got money, probably some relative pulling a trick to rattle her." Miss Murgatroyd, soft and round like a dumpling, clutched her teacup. "But what if it's not a trick, Hinch? What if someone really gets hurt?" Hinchcliffe snorted. "Then we'll see who's got a grudge in this village. Plenty of folks might, with Letitia's fortune." Across town, young Philippa Hames, a quiet widow who worked as a gardener, overheard the gossip at the grocer's. She rented a room at Little Paddocks and liked Letitia, who'd been kind to her. The ad made her stomach twist. She didn't like surprises, not after losing her husband in the war. She decided to head home early, just to be safe. At Little Paddocks, the household was in a flurry. Patrick and Julia Simmons, Letitia's young cousins, lounged in the drawing-room, teasing each other. Patrick, a handsome man in his 20s with a lazy grin, flipped through a magazine. "A murder, eh? Sounds exciting. Bet it's a game. Maybe I'll play the detective." Julia, his sister, rolled her eyes. She was sharp and pretty, with a cool stare that made people nervous. "Don't be an idiot, Pat. It's probably some village kid's prank, or one of your awful friends." "Awful," Patrick laughed. "You're just jealous you didn't think of it." Mitzi, the housekeeper, stormed in, carrying a tray of teacups that rattled in her shaking hands. She was a young woman from somewhere, in Europe, with dark hair and a temper that flared like a match. "This is bad," she cried. "This murder talk. I know what it means. Someone wants to kill us all. I leave this house, I tell you." "Calm down, Mitzi," Letitia said, entering the room. "No one's killing anyone. It's just a silly ad." But Mitzi wasn't calmed. "You don't know. In my country, people die for less. I see things, bad things." She dropped the tray, and a cup shattered on the floor. Dora gasped and Patrick laughed, which only made Mitzi shriek louder. "Letitia, do something!" Dora pleaded, wringing her hands. "People are coming tonight. Mrs. Harmon said she's bringing the vicar, and Mrs. Swettenham's dragging her son Edmund along. They all think it's a party." Letitia sighed. "Then we'll treat it like one. We'll have tea and biscuits. Ready. If it's a game, we'll play along and laugh it off. If it's something else—" She paused, her eyes narrowing. "We'll deal with it." The clock ticked closer to 6:30 p.m. The village was abuzz, and Little Paddocks filled with an odd mix of excitement and nerves. Letitia ordered Mitzi to set out sandwiches and a pot of tea. Patrick and Julia helped, though Julia kept muttering about how ridiculous it all was. Dora flitted about, arranging chairs and fussing over the tablecloth. Philippa arrived, quiet as always, and offered to help in the kitchen, but Letitia sent her to rest. "You look pale, dear," she said kindly. By 6:15, the drawing-room was ready. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm light over the old furniture. Outside, the October evening was chilly, with leaves rustling in the wind. The first guests arrived. Mrs. Harmon, her round face bright with curiosity, and her husband, the vicar, who looked mildly confused. Miss Hinchcliffe and Miss Murgatroyd followed, Hinchcliffe striding in like she owned the place. Mrs. Swettenham swept in with her son Edmund, a bookish young man who kept adjusting his glasses. A few others trickled in, neighbours, curious villagers, all drawn by the strange ad. "It's like a theatre show," Mrs. Harmon whispered to Dora, her eyes sparkling. "Do we guess the murderer? Is there a prize?" Dora laughed nervously. "Oh, I don't know, Amy. Letty says it's a prank, but—" Letitia greeted everyone with her usual calm, though her smile was tight. She poured tea, passed sandwiches, and kept the conversation light. Patrick flirted with the younger women, while Julia sat by the window, looking bored. Philippa stayed, quiet, watching the room. Mitzi hovered in the doorway, muttering to herself. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 6:30. Everyone froze, waiting. Nothing happened. Mrs. Harmon giggled. "Well, that's a bit disappointing." The dieu went out. A gasp rippled through the room. Darkness swallowed everything thick and heavy. Someone screamed. Mitzi, probably. Then a flashlight beam cut through the black, swinging wildly. A man's voice, rough and unfamiliar, shouted, "Hands up, all of you!" 2 shots rang out, sharp and loud. Glass shattered somewhere. Women screamed and chairs scraped the floor. The flashlight beam jerked, then dropped. A heavy thud followed, like something hitting the ground. The lights flicked back on. Letitia stood by the fireplace, her hand pressed to her ear. Blood trickled between her fingers, staining her collar. Dora clung to her, sobbing. Patrick was halfway across the room, his face pale. Julia stared at the floor, her eyes wide. Philippa gripped a chair, her knuckles white. The guests huddled together, whispering and gasping. On the floor, near the doorway, lay a man. He was young, with dark hair and a cheap suit. A revolver lay near his hand, and a flashlight was by his side. His eyes stared blankly at the ceiling. Blood pooled beneath him. Mrs. Harmon screamed. Miss Hinchcliffe knelt beside the man, checking his pulse. "He's dead," she said gruffly. "Shot through the chest." Letitia swayed, and Dora caught her. "Letty, you're hurt!" she cried. "It's just a scratch," Letitia said, her voice shaky but firm. She touched her ear, wincing. "The bullet grazed me." "Who is he?" Edmund Swettenham asked, his voice high with panic. "What was he doing here?" No one knew. Mitzi was sobbing in the kitchen, refusing to come out. Patrick muttered something about calling the police. Julia stood frozen, staring at the body. Philippa's eyes darted around, as if searching for something, or someone. Mrs. Harmon clutched her husband's arm. "The ad?" she whispered. "It said a murder would happen, and now it has." The room fell silent, except for the crackle of the fire. Outside the wind howled, and the village of Chipping Cleghorn felt suddenly far from sleepy. Letitia's sharp gaze swept the room, lingering on each face. She didn't speak, but her mind was racing. This was no prank. Someone had planned this. Someone who wanted blood. The police would come soon. Questions would be asked. Secrets would spill. And in the shadows of Little Paddocks, the truth waited, cold and sharp as a knife. Chapter 2. The Aftermath. The air in Little Paddocks was thick with shock. The smell of gunpowder lingered, mixing with the faint scent of tea and burnt firewood. The dead man lay on the floor, his cheap suit crumpled, his dark hair slick with sweat. The revolver by his hand gleamed under the lamplight, and the broken glass from a shattered vase crunched underfoot. Letitia Blacklock stood by the fireplace, pressing a handkerchief to her bleeding ear. Her face was pale, but her eyes were sharp, scanning the room. The guests huddled in small groups, whispering, their faces a mix of fear and confusion. Dora Bunner clung to Letitia's arm, her voice wobbly. "Letty, you're hurt! Oh, it's awful! Who was that man? Why did he shoot at you?" "It's just a graze, Bunny," Letitia said, her voice steady but tight. She glanced at the body, then away. "I don't know who he is, but we'll find out." Patrick Simmons, his usual grin gone, knelt by the dead man. "He's not from the village," he said. "I'd know him. Looks like some city fellow." He reached for the revolver, but Julia, his sister, grabbed his arm. "Don't touch it, Pat," she snapped, her cool voice sharper than usual. "The police will want it as is." "Police?" Mrs. Harmon, the vicar's wife, gasped. Her round cheeks were flushed and her eyes darted to the body. "Oh, goodness, yes! We need the police! This was no game!" Miss Hinchcliffe, sturdy and grim, stood up from checking the man's pulse. "Dead as a doornail," she said. "Shot through the chest. Looks like he fired twice, one at Letitia, one at himself. Or someone else got him. Suicide?" Edmund Swettenham, the bookish young man, pushed his glasses up his nose. "But why come here? Why the ad?" No one answered. Mitzi's sobs echoed from the kitchen, loud and frantic. Philippa Hames, the quiet widow, stood by a chair, her hands clenched. She hadn't spoken since the lights came back on, but her eyes flicked to the doorway as if expecting someone else to burst in. Letitia took charge. "Patrick, call the police, now, and tell Mitzi to stop that racket. We need calm, not chaos." Patrick nodded and ran to the phone in the hall. The guests murmured, their voices a nervous hum. Mrs. Swettenham, Edmund's mother, fanned herself with a handkerchief. "This is dreadful," she said, "simply dreadful. Who puts an ad in the paper and then does this?" The vicar, a gentle man with thinning hair, tried to soothe her. "Let's not jump to conclusions, Mrs. Swettenham. The police will sort it out." But the room felt heavy, like a storm was brewing. Everyone was watching each other, wondering who knew what. The strange ad in the Gazette, "A murder is announced," had come true, and no one knew why. Half an hour later, the police arrived. Inspector Craddock was a tall man with a calm face and sharp eyes that seemed to see through walls. His dark coat was damp from the October drizzle, and his boots left muddy prints on the rug. Behind him came Sergeant Fletcher, a younger man with a notebook, scribbling furiously. The guests were still there, too shaken to leave, and Letitia had made more tea, though no one drank it. Craddock knelt by the body, his gloved hands careful. "Be male, late 20s, maybe early 30s, he said to Fletcher. "No identification yet. Looks like a single shot to the chest. Revolver's a cheap model, easy to get." He glanced at the broken vase and the bullet hole in the wall near the fireplace. 2 shots fired. One hit Miss Blacklock's ear. The other got him. Letitia, her ear now bandaged by Mrs. Harmon, sat on the sofa. "I didn't know him," she said. "He burst in when the lights went out, shouted something about hands up, and then the shots came. It was so fast." Craddock nodded, but his eyes lingered on her. "And the lights? Who turned them off?" Letitia hesitated. "I don't know. They just went out. Maybe a fuse." "Or someone flipped the switch," Miss Hinchcliffe said bluntly. She stood by the window, arms crossed. "Someone who wanted it dark." The room went quiet. Dora's hands shook, spilling tea on her skirt. "Oh, don't say that, Hinch. It's too horrible." Craddock turned to the guests. Did anyone recognize the man, or his voice? Heads shook. Mrs. Harmon bit her lip. He sounded foreign, maybe, a bit rough, but I was so scared I can't be sure. Mitzi, dragged from the kitchen by Patrick, stood in the doorway, her eyes red. "I know nothing," she cried before Craddock could ask. "I was in kitchen making sandwiches when lights go out. Then bang, bang, I hide under table." Craddock raised an eyebrow. "You didn't see him come in?" "No, I swear." Mitzi's voice was shrill. "I stay away from bad men like that." Julia, leaning against the wall, rolled her eyes. "She's always dramatic," she muttered, to Patrick, who shushed her. Craddock walked to the light switch by the door. He flicked it a few times, frowning. "Works fine now." Someone turned it off, then back on. Who was near the door when it happened? No one spoke. Philippa's fingers tightened on her chair. Dora looked at Letitia, then away. Patrick shrugged. "We were all over the place," he said. "It was chaos." Craddock made a note, his face unreadable. He turned to Letitia. "This ad in the Gazette, you said you didn't place it?" "Absolutely not," Letitia said firmly. "I called the Gazette office. They said it was paid in cash, no name. I thought it was a prank until—" She gestured to the body. Fletcher was sketching the room, marking where everyone stood. Craddock looked at the bullet hole again. "Odd," he said. "The shot that grazed you, Miss Blacklock, came from that direction. But the man was shot, point blank, almost like 2 people were shooting." "2?" Mrs. Swettenham gasped. "You mean someone else was here, or someone in this room?" Hinchcliffe said, her voice low. The guests froze, looking at each other. Craddock held up a hand. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. We'll take statements. Nobody leaves until we're done." Across the village, in a small cottage with rose bushes out front, Miss Jane Marple sat by a window, knitting a pale blue scarf. She was a slight woman, older than most, with fluffy white hair and eyes that sparkled with quiet wisdom. She'd come to Chipping Cleghorn to visit her friend, Mrs. Lucas, who was recovering from a cold. The two were sipping tea when Mrs. Lucas mentioned the Gazetted, a murder announced, Mrs. Lucas said, her voice full of gossip. At Letitia Blacklock's, of all places! And now I hear there was a real shooting. A man's dead, Jane, dead. Can you believe it? Miss Marple's knitting needles paused. Dead? She said softly. How very strange. Mrs. Lucas leaned forward, eager to spill more. Mrs. Harmon called me. Said a man burst into Little Paddocks, fired a gun, and now he's gone and shot himself. Or someone shot him. Letitia got a scratch on her ear. The whole village is talking. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, but her smile stayed gentle. An ad for a murder, and then a murder happens. That's not a coincidence, dear. That's a plan. Mrs. Lucas blinked. A plan? You mean someone meant for it to happen? Perhaps, Miss Marple said, her needles clicking again. People don't announce murders for fun, not unless they want everyone watching when it happens. She set her knitting down and stood, smoothing her skirt. I think I'll take a walk to Little Paddocks tomorrow. Pay my respects to Miss Blacklock. It's only polite after such a shock. Mrs. Lucas chuckled. You and your curiosity, Jane. You'll be solving the case before the police. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Oh, I'm just an old lady who likes to listen. People talk, you know, and sometimes they say more than they mean to. Back at Little Paddocks, the police were wrapping up. Craddock had questioned everyone, though no one admitted to knowing the dead man. Fletcher found a wallet in the man's pocket with a name, Rudy Schwez. Works at the Royal Spa Hotel in Meddenham Wells, Fletcher said. Clerk, maybe a porter. We'll check it out. Craddock nodded. Good. And get that revolver to the lab. I want to know if it fired both shots. The guests were allowed to leave, though Craddock told them to stay in the village. Mrs. Harmon hugged Letitia before going, promising to pray for her. Miss Hinchcliffe and Miss Murgatroyd left together, Hinchcliffe muttering about fishy business. Mrs. Swettenham dragged Edmund out, still fanning herself. Letitia sent Dora to bed with a hot water bottle. Patrick and Julia offered to clean up, but Letitia waved them off. Go to sleep, she said. We've had enough for one night. Philippa lingered, her face pale. Miss Blacklock, are you sure you're all right? She asked quietly. Letitia smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. I'm fine, Philippa. Just a scratch. Get some rest. Mitzi, still sniffling, refused to stay in the house. I sleep in the shed, she declared. No murderers will get me. She stormed out, clutching a blanket. When the house was quiet, Letitia sat alone in the drawing-room. The fire had died to embers, and the bullet hole in the wall stared at her like an accusing eye. She touched her bandaged ear, her fingers trembling. Who are you, Rudy Schwez? She whispered. And why me? The next morning, the village was buzzing again. At the Bluebird Tea Room, Mrs. Harmon recounted the night to anyone who'd listen. It was like a play, she said. The lights went out and bang! That poor man dead on the floor. Miss Hinchcliffe, sipping coffee, snorted. Poor man, my foot. He came to kill someone. Question is, who? Across town, Miss Marple walked to the post office, her scarf fluttering in the breeze. Mrs. Finch greeted her with a flood of gossip. They say he was a foreigner, Miss Marple. Rudy Schwez, from that fancy hotel in Meddenham Wells. Maybe he was a spy. Miss Marple smiled. Perhaps, but spies don't usually announce their plans in the newspaper. She bought a stamp, then headed toward Little Paddocks. Her mind was busy, piecing together what she'd heard. A stranger with a gun, a staged blackout, an ad that brought everyone to watch. It wasn't just a murder, she thought. It was a performance. And someone in Chipping Cleghorn was the director at the police station. Craddock pored over Rudy Schwetz's wallet, a few pounds, a hotel key, and a photo of a young woman with a coy smile. "Find out who she is," he told Fletcher, "and check if Schwez had any enemies or debts." Fletcher nodded. "You think he was hired?" Craddock frowned. Maybe. Or maybe he was the bait. That ad wasn't random. Someone wanted a crowd. Someone wanted Letitia Blacklock scared. Or dead. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "This isn't over," he said. "Not by a long shot." In Little Paddocks, Letitia stood by the window, watching the road. Dora was still in bed. Patrick and Julia were arguing over breakfast. And Philippa was out in the garden, pulling weeds like nothing had happened. Mitzi was back in the kitchen, banging pots and muttering about danger. Letitia's hand brushed her bandaged ear. She didn't know Rudy Schwez. She didn't know why he'd come. But deep down, a cold fear stirred. The ad had said a murder would happen. And though she'd survived, she couldn't shake the feeling that the real danger was still out there waiting. Chapter 3. The Household Secrets. The morning after the shooting, Little Paddocks felt like a house holding its breath. The October sun filtered through the windows, casting pale light on the polished wood floors. But the warmth couldn't chase away the chill. The bullet hole in the drawing-room wall stared like an angry eye, and the broken vase was swept into a dustpan, though bits of glass still glinted in the rug. Letitia Blacklock sat at the breakfast table, her bandaged ear hidden under a scarf. She sipped her coffee, her face calm, but her eyes sharp, watching everyone. Dora Bunner fluttered in, her hands twisting a handkerchief. "Oh, Letty, I barely slept. That awful man, those shots, it's like a nightmare." Her voice was high, and her greying hair stuck out in wisps, making her look like a frightened bird. "Dora, sit down and eat," Letitia said, pushing a plate of toast toward her. "It's over. The police will handle it." But what if it's not over? Dora's eyes were wide. That ad said a murder would happen, and it did. What if someone else comes? Patrick Simmons sprawled in. A chair with a newspaper looked up. "Bunny, you're making a fuss over nothing. The fellow's dead. He shot at Aunt Letty, missed, and then shot himself. Case closed." His grin was back, but it didn't reach his eyes. Julia Simmons, sitting by the window, rolled her eyes. "Don't be stupid, Pat. It's not that simple. Why would a stranger pick this house? And that ad, someone planned it." Her voice was sharp, and she flicked her dark hair over her shoulder, looking bored but tense. Philippa Hames, the quiet widow, ate her toast in silence. Her blonde hair was pulled back, and her face was pale, like she hadn't slept either. She glanced at Letitia, then down at her plate, as if afraid to meet anyone's eyes. Mitzi burst in from the kitchen, carrying a tray of jam and butter. Dick, hands shook, and her dark eyes darted around. "I tell you, this house is cursed," she cried. "First that man with the gun, now police everywhere. I quit. I go back to London." Mitzi, enough, Letitia said firmly. You're not quitting. We need you here. Now go make more tea. Mitzi muttered something in her own language and stormed out, slamming the kitchen door. Dora jumped at the noise, dropping her handkerchief. Patrick laughed, but it sounded forced. Letitia set her cup down. We can't fall apart, she said. The police are coming back today. They'll ask questions. We answer honestly, and this will all be sorted. But the room felt heavy, like everyone was hiding something. The ad in the Gazette, the blackout, the shots. It all pointed to a secret, and Letitia's steady voice couldn't hide the worry in her eyes. Across the village, Miss Jane Marple walked along the lane to Little Paddocks, her black umbrella tucked under her arm. The air was crisp, smelling of fallen leaves and chimney smoke. She wore a tweed coat and a neat hat, her white hair peeking out like a cloud. Her steps were slow, but her eyes were bright, taking in every detail. The butcher's boy on his bicycle, the postman whistling, the curtains twitching as neighbours peeked out. She'd heard more gossip at the post office that morning. Mrs. Finch said the dead man, Rudy Schwez, was a clerk at the Royal Spa Hotel in Meddenham Wells, a town not far away. Some said he was a foreigner, maybe Swiss, with a shady past. Others thought he was after Letitia's money. Miss Marple listened, nodding politely, but her mind was busy. A man doesn't walk into a house and shoot unless he's desperate, or paid. And that ad. It was a trap, she was sure, meant to draw a crowd and hide something darker. At Little Paddocks, Miss Marple knocked on the door. Mitzi opened it, her face red and blotchy. "What do you want?" she snapped. "No visitors. We have enough trouble." "I'm Jane Marple," she said with a gentle smile. "I'm a friend of Mrs. Lucas. I heard about last night and wanted to see if Miss Blacklock is all right." Mitzi hesitated, then let her in. "Fine, but no funny business. This house is bad luck." Miss Marple stepped into the hall, her eyes flicking to the bullet hole in the drawing-room wall. Letitia came out, her scarf slightly askew. "Miss Marple, how kind of you to visit," she said, her voice polite but guarded. "It's been a difficult night." "I can imagine," Miss Marple said, her tone soft. "Such a shocking thing. I hope you're not too shaken." Letitia led her to the drawing-room, where Dora was fussing with a vase of flowers. "Oh, Miss Marple," Dora cried, "it was awful. That man, the gun, the blood. Letty could have been killed." "Dora, please," Letitia said, motioning her to sit. "Miss Marple doesn't need all the details." But Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Oh, I don't mind. It's a small village. News travels fast. I heard the man was from Meddenham Wells. Did you know him?" Letitia shook her head. "Not at all. His name was Rudy Schwez, according to the police. A hotel clerk, I think. I've never been to the Royal Spa." Dora leaned forward, her voice a whisper. He shouted, "Hands up!" and then the lights went out. "I was so scared, I nearly fainted. And Letty's ear. Oh, it's dreadful." Miss Marple nodded, her face kind but her mind sharp. She noticed Dora's nervous chatter, Letitia's tight smile, and the way the room felt tense, like a string pulled too tight. "The lights went out," she said. "How curious. Was it a fuse?" "No," Letitia said quickly. "The police checked. Someone turned the switch off, then on again." Miss Marple's knitting bag sat in her lap, and her fingers brushed the wool inside. "Someone in the house, then," she said lightly. Or someone who knew the house well? Letitia's eyes flickered, but she said nothing. Dora gasped. You mean one of us? Oh, no, that's impossible. Miss Marple smiled. Just a thought, dear. People do strange things when they're scared. Patrick and Julia came in, stopping, short when they saw Miss Marple. Who's this? Patrick asked, his grin back but wary. Miss Marple, a friend, Letitia said. She's come to check on us. Julia raised an eyebrow, her cool gaze sizing up the old lady. Nice of you, she said, but her tone was flat. It's a mess here, though. Police poking around, Mitzi screaming. Not much to see. Oh, I don't mind a little mess, Miss Marple said, her voice sweet. I've seen worse in my village. People always have secrets, don't they? Patrick laughed, but it sounded nervous. Secrets? Not us. We're an open book. Miss Marple's smile didn't waver, but her eyes lingered on Patrick's fidgeting hands, Julia's stiff posture, and Letitia's quick glance at Dora. Secrets? She thought. This house is full of them. At the police station, Inspector Craddock sat at his desk, a pile of papers in front of him. Sergeant Fletcher handed him a report. Rudy Schwez, age 28, worked at the Royal Spa Hotel. Fletcher said, Swiss came to England after the war. Bit of a drifter. Hotel manager says he was charming but slippery. Liked to snoop. Craddock frowned. Snoop? On what? Guests mostly, Fletcher said. He'd listen at doors, peek at letters. Manager caught him trying to open a guest suitcase once. Said he was looking for lost property. Craddock leaned back, tapping his pen. Sounds like a blackmailer. Maybe he knew something about Miss Blacklock. Fletcher nodded. Could be. We found a note in his room at the hotel. Just a name, Letty, and a number. Matches Little Paddocks' phone. Craddock's eyes narrowed. So he knew her, or thought he did. But why the ad? Why make a big show? Maybe he wanted witnesses, Fletcher said. Make it look like a robbery gone wrong. Shoot her, then himself, and nobody suspects the real reason. Craddock shook his head. Doesn't add up. If he wanted her dead, why miss? And who turned off the lights? They looked at the revolver, now in a plastic bag. Tests showed it fired both shots. The one that grazed Letitia's ear and the one that killed Rudy. But the angles were odd. The shot at Letitia came from across the room, but Rudy's wound was close, almost point blank. Craddock rubbed his chin. Either he shot himself, or someone got close and pulled the trigger. Fletcher scribbled a note. We're checking his hotel room again. Might find more. Do that, Craddock said, and talk to the hotel staff. Someone must have seen him with a guest, or a woman. That photo in his wallet. Find her. Back at Little Paddocks, Miss Marple sipped tea, listening as Dora rambled about the old days. Letty and I went to school together, you know, Dora said, her eyes misty. We were so close, like sisters. She worked for that rich man, Randall Godler, years ago. Such a grand life she had. Letitia's smile tightened. That was a long time ago, Bunny. No need to bore Miss Marple. Oh, it's no bother, Miss Marple said. Randall Godler, you say? I heard of him. Made a fortune in finance, didn't he? Left it all to his wife, I suppose? Dora nodded eagerly. Oh, yes, but she died. And then there was his sister-in-law, Sonia, who'd get it next. but nobody's seen Sonia in years. They say Letty might get the money if Sonia's gone." Letitia stood abruptly. "That's enough, Dora. It's all rumours. Miss Marple, more tea?" Miss Marple shook her head, her mind racing. Money, she thought. Always a motive. If Letitia stood to inherit a fortune, someone might want her out of the way, or want to scare her into leaving. But who? And why bring Rudy Schwez into it? She glanced at Patrick and Julia, who were whispering in the corner. Patrick's grin was gone, and Julia's face was hard, like she was hiding something. Philippa came in from the garden, her hands smudged with dirt. She nodded at Miss Marple, but said nothing, her eyes distant. Mitzi burst in again, carrying a broom. I clean, but this house is cursed," she cried. "That man, he come for her." She pointed at Letitia, who froze. "Mitzi, stop it," Letitia said sharply. "You're upsetting everyone." But Mitzi's eyes were wild. "I see him before, at the hotel, when I visit my cousin. He talk to bad people, sneaky people. He want money, I know it." Miss Marple's knitting bag slipped to the floor, but her eyes stayed on Mitzi. "You saw him at the Royal Spa?" she asked gently. "Who was he talking to?" Mitzi's mouth snapped shut. "I say nothing more. I not get killed." She ran back to the kitchen, the broom clattering behind her. Letitia sighed. "She's always dramatic. Pay her no mind." But Miss Marple's mind was spinning. Mitzi knew something, even if she was too scared to say it. And Dora's chatter about the Godler fortune was no accident. Someone in this house, or outside it, wanted that money, and Rudy Schwez was part of the plan. That afternoon, Miss Marple walked back to Mrs. Lucas's cottage, her umbrella tapping the ground. The village was alive with gossip. At the tea shop, Mrs. Harmon waved her over. "Miss Marple, you were at Little Paddocks. Is Letitia all right? They say the man was a crook." Miss Marple smiled. "She's holding up, dear. Tell me, what do people say about Miss Blacklock's family? Those cousins, Patrick and Julia." Mrs. Harmon leaned in, her voice low. "Oh, they're a bit odd. Showed up a year ago, calling her Aunt Letty. But nobody's sure they're really cousins. And Philippa Hames, she's so quiet, but they say she's got debts. War widow, you know. Sad story." Miss Marple nodded, filing it away. Debts, distant cousins, a fortune waiting to be claimed, and a dead man who knew too much. She thanked Mrs. Harmon and headed home, her knitting bag swinging lightly. At Little Paddocks, Letitia stood alone in the drawing-room, staring at the bullet hole. Dora was napping, Patrick and Julia were out, and Philippa was back in the garden. Mitzi's muttering drifted from the kitchen. Letitia's hand touched her bandaged ear, and a shiver ran through her. Rudy Schwez had come for her. She was sure of it. But why? And who turned off the lights? She didn't hear the soft creak of the floorboard behind her. Someone was watching, waiting, their eyes cold as the October wind. At the police station, Craddock got a call from Meddenham Wells. The hotel manager confirmed Rudy Schwez had been fired once for stealing, then rehired because he was charming with guests. He had a knack for secrets, the manager said. Always knew who was who. Last week he was talking to a woman, young, blonde, cagey. Called her Myrna. Craddock's jaw tightened. Myrna Harris, he said, holding the photo from Rudy's wallet. "Find her. She's our next lead." He hung up, staring at the revolver on his desk. The ad, the blackout, the shots. It was all too neat, like a play rehearsed to the last line. Someone had set this up, and Letitia Blacklock was at the centre. But was she the victim or something else? Chapter 4. The Village Gossip. The village of Chipping Cleghorn woke to a grey October morning, the sky heavy with clouds that promised rain. The air smelled of damp earth and chimney smoke, and the streets were busy with folks hurrying to the shops, their heads bent against the wind. But the real storm was the talk buzzing through every corner, tea rooms, post office, even the butcher's. The shooting at Little Paddocks was all anyone could talk about. A man was dead. Letitia Blacklock's ear was grazed, and that's strange. Ad in the Gazette had everyone whispering. Was it a prank gone wrong? A robbery? Or something darker? Miss Jane Marple sat in the Bluebird tea room, her knitting needles clicking softly as she sipped her tea. Her table was near the window, giving her a clear view of the street where villagers passed, their faces alight with gossip. She wore a neat wool coat and a hat with a small feather, her white hair fluffy as a dandelion. Her friend Mrs. Lucas had stayed home, still sniffling from her cold, so Miss Marple was alone, listening to the chatter around her. She didn't need to ask questions. People loved to talk, and in a village like this, they said more than they meant to. Mrs. Harmon, the vicar's wife, bustled in, her round cheeks pink from the cold. She spotted Miss Marple and hurried over, plopping into a chair. "Oh, Jane, it's awful! You were at Little Paddocks yesterday, weren't you? Is Letitia all right? Everyone's saying that man, Rudy Schwez, was after her money." Miss Marple smiled gently, her needles never stopping. "She's shaken, dear, but holding up. What do people say about this Rudy Schwez?" Mrs. Harmon leaned in, her voice low. "They say he was a crook. Mrs. Finch heard he got sacked from that hotel in Meddenham Wells for stealing, then got his job back because he was so charming. But he was always poking into people's business, you know, reading their letters, listening at doors. Sounds like a blackmailer to me." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes sharp behind her kind smile. Blackmail, she thought. That fits. A man like that would know secrets, secrets worth killing for. "And Miss Blacklock?" she asked. "What do they say about her?" Mrs. Harmon's eyes widened. "Oh, she's a mystery. Been in Chipping Cleghorn a few years, but nobody knows much about her past. They say she worked for Randall Godler, that rich man who died ages ago, left a fortune he did to his wife Belle. But Belle's old and sickly now, and if she dies, Letitia gets the lot, unless Sonia, Randall's sister-in-law, is still alive. Nobody's seen Sonia in years, though. Some say she's dead." Marple's needles paused for a moment. "A fortune," she said softly. "That's a powerful reason to cause trouble. And this Sonia, nobody knows where she is." Mrs. Harmon shook her head. "Not a peep. But if she's gone, Letitia's next in line. That's what Dora Bunner told Mrs. Swettenham. Dora's always talking about the old days with Letitia, like they were grand ladies in some big city." Miss Marple tucked that away in her mind. Money, inheritance, a missing heir. It was starting to sound like a puzzle with too many pieces missing. "And the others in the house?" she asked. "The cousins, Patrick and Julia, the young widow, Philippa." Mrs. Harmon sipped her tea, eager to share. Patrick's a charmer, but a bit lazy, folks say. Julia's sharp as a tack, doesn't miss a thing. They call Letitia aunt, but nobody's sure they're really related. As for Philippa Hames, she's quiet, keeps to herself. Lost her husband in the war, poor thing. Works as a gardener to make ends meet. Some say she's got debts piling up. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Debts, she thought. Another reason to want money. And cousins who might not be cousins. She thanked Mrs. Harmon and turned her attention to the tea-room, where Miss Hinchcliffe and Miss Murgatroyd sat at a corner table, their heads close together. Miss Hinchcliffe, sturdy and gruff, was talking loudly. "It's fishy, Murgatroyd. That ad wasn't a joke. Someone wanted Letitia dead or scared. And that blackout? Someone in the house did it. Mark my words." Miss Murgatroyd, soft and round, looked nervous. "Oh, Hinch, don't say that. It was bad enough being there when the lights went out. I couldn't see a thing. What if someone else was in the room?" Miss Marple's ears perked up. She didn't turn, but her knitting slowed. Someone else in the room. That was worth remembering. She sipped her tea, letting the conversation drift to her. At Little Paddocks, the house was quiet, but the air felt heavy, like a storm was coming. Letitia stood in the drawing-room, staring at the bullet hole in the wall. Her bandaged ear itched under the scarf, and her hands were cold despite the fire crackling in the hearth. Dora was upstairs, resting after another bout of nerves. Patrick and Julia were out, probably at the pub, and Philippa was in the garden, digging up weeds like nothing had happened. Mitzi was in the kitchen, banging pots and muttering about curses. Letitia's mind was racing. Rudy Schwez. She didn't know him. She was sure of it. But the way he'd shouted, "Hands up!" and aimed at her, it felt personal. And that ad in the Gazette, announcing a murder at her house. Someone had planned this. Someone who knew her, or knew about her. But who? The phone rang, making her jump. It was Inspector Craddock, his voice calm but firm. "Miss Blacklock, we've got more on Rudy Schwez. He was a small-time crook, liked to dig up dirt on people. We found a note in his room with your name, Letty, and your phone number. Ever hear from him before?" Letitia's heart skipped. "No," she said, her voice steady. "Never. I don't know why he'd have my name." Craddock paused, like he didn't quite believe her. "We're looking into his contacts. He was seen with a woman named Myrna Harris at the hotel. Mean anything to you?" "No," Letitia said quickly. "I don't know her either." "All right," Craddock said. "We'll be by later to talk to your household. Stay put." Letitia hung up, her hand shaking. Myrna Harris. The name meant nothing, but the note with Letty on it made her stomach twist. Nobody called her Letty anymore, not since her days working for Randall Godler. That was a lifetime ago, before Chipping Cleghorn, before this house. She pushed the thought away, but it clung like damp fog. Dora shuffled in, her face pale. "Letty, you look worried. Is it the police? What did they say?" "Nothing new," Letitia lied, forcing a smile. "Just checking on us. Go lie down, Bunny. You need rest." Dora hesitated, then nodded and shuffled out. Letitia watched her go, her chest tight. Dora knew too much about the old days, about Randall Godler, about the money. She was loyal, but she talked too much. and in a house full of eyes and ears, that was dangerous. Miss Marple left the tea-room and walked to the post office, her umbrella tapping the pavement. Mrs. Finch was behind the counter, sorting letters and chatting with a customer. When she saw Miss Marple, she waved her over. "Jane, you've been to Little Paddocks. Any news? The whole village is in a tizzy." Miss Marple smiled. "Just checking on Miss Blacklock. She's managing, but it's a shock. Tell me, what do people know about her past before she came here?" Mrs. Finch leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "Not much, but there's talk. She worked for Randall Godler, you know, that rich financier. Lived in London, had a fancy job. Some say she was close to him, maybe too close. When he died, his wife got the money, but Letitia's name was in the will. If Belle Godler dies and Sonia's gone, Letitia's set for life." Miss Marple nodded, her face thoughtful. "And Sonia? Any word on her?" Mrs. Finch shook her head. "Vanished. Years ago. Some say she ran off with a man, others say she's dead. Nobody knows. But if she's alive, she'd get the money before Letitia." Miss Marple thanked her and stepped outside, her mind busy. A missing heir, a fortune waiting, and a dead man who knew Letitia's name. It was like a knot, tangled and tight, but she was starting to see the threads. She headed toward the church, where Mrs. Harmon was arranging flowers for Sunday service. Miss Marple found her by the altar, fussing with a vase of chrysanthemums. "Jane," Mrs. Harmon said, brushing dirt off her hands. "You're everywhere today, still sniffing out the mystery." Miss Marple chuckled. "Just visiting friends, dear. But I'm curious, Miss Blacklock's cousins, Patrick and Julia. Are they well liked?" Mrs. Harmon frowned. "Patrick's charming, but a bit of a rogue. Always joking, never serious. Julia's different, cold, like she's hiding something. They showed up out of nowhere, calling Letitia Aunt. But Dora told me once they're distant cousins, not close family. Odd, don't you think?" "Very odd," Miss Marple said, her eyes distant. "And Philippa Hames? She seems so quiet." Mrs. Harmon nodded. "Poor thing. Her husband died in the war, left her with nothing. She works hard, but you can see the worry in her eyes. I heard she's got debts, big ones. Letitia's been kind, letting her stay at Little Paddocks." Miss Marple's knitting bag swung gently as she walked away, her mind turning over the pieces. Debts, distant cousins, a fortune tied to a missing woman, and Rudy Schwez, who came with a gun and a plan. Someone was pulling strings, and Miss Marple was determined to find out who. At the police station, Inspector Craddock pored over Rudy Schwez's file. Sergeant Fletcher burst in, holding a notebook. "Got something, sir. Hotel staff say Rudy was cosy with a woman, Myrna Harris. Blonde, young, worked at a cafe nearby. They saw her with him a week ago, looking nervous. And get this, Rudy was asking about Letitia Blacklock. Said he'd met her once, years ago." Craddock's eyes narrowed. "Met her? Or heard about her? Did he say how?" Fletcher shook his head. "No, but he was digging. Asked about her job with Randall Godler. Said she had secrets worth knowing." Craddock leaned back, his jaw tight. "Blackmail. He found something on Letitia, or thought he did. That's why he came to Little Paddocks. But why the ad? Why the big show?" Fletcher shrugged. "Maybe he wanted witnesses. Make it look like an accident." "Or someone else did," Craddock said. He picked up the photo of Myrna Harris from Rudy's wallet. Find her. She's our link. Back at Little Paddocks, the afternoon was quiet, but the tension was thick. Letitia sat in the drawing room, a book open but unread. Patrick and Julia were back, arguing in the hall about who'd left the car's gas tank empty. Philippa came in from the garden, her hands dirty, her face pale. "Miss Blacklock," she said softly, "are the police coming again?" "Yes," Letitia said, closing her book. "They'll want to talk to everyone. Just tell them what you saw." Philippa nodded, but her eyes darted to the bullet hole. "It's strange," she said. "That ad. It's like someone wanted us all here, watching." Letitia's smile was tight. "A silly prank, that's all. Don't worry." But Philippa didn't look convinced. She left for her room, her steps slow. Mitzi's voice drifted from the kitchen, complaining about the police. Dora came down, her face still pale. "Letty, you don't think someone in the house did this, do you?" Letitia's hand froze on her book. "Don't be silly, Bunny. It was that man, Rudy. Nobody else." But Dora's eyes were scared. "I keep thinking about the lights. Someone turned them off, someone we know." Letitia didn't answer. She stared at the fire, her mind racing. The ad, the gun, the name Letty on a note. Someone knew something from her past. And if they did, this wasn't over. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. In the village, Miss Marple sat by Mrs. Lucas's fire, her knitting needles clicking. She was thinking about Randall Godler, about money, about secrets. The ad had brought a crowd to Little Paddocks, but it had also brought death, and Miss Marple was sure the killer was still close, hiding in plain sight. Chapter 5. The Second Death. The grey clouds over Chipping Cleghorn had burst into rain by Saturday morning, drumming on the roofs and turning the lanes to mud. Little Paddocks stood quiet, but the house felt like a pot ready to boil over. The bullet hole in the drawing-room wall was covered with a framed picture, but it didn't hide the memory of Rudy Schwetz's body on the floor. Letitia Blacklock moved through the house with her usual calm, her bandaged ear hidden under a scarf, but her eyes were sharp, watching every shadow. The village was still buzzing about the shooting, and now the police were back, asking questions that made everyone jumpy. In the kitchen, Mitzi was scrubbing pots so hard they squeaked. Her dark hair was tied back, but her face was red with anger. "I tell you, this house is bad," she muttered to herself. "First, that man with the gun. Now police everywhere. I leave soon, you see." Dora Bunner sat at the breakfast table, her hands shaking as she buttered her toast. "Oh, Letty, I can't stop thinking about it," she said, her voice wobbly. "That awful ad, the lights going out, the blood. It's like a bad dream." Letitia poured tea, her smile tight. "It's over, Bunny. Eat something. You're pale as a ghost." Patrick Simmons lounged in a chair, flipping through a newspaper. "Bunny's right, though," he said, his grin lazy, but his eyes sharp. "It's creepy. Whoever wrote that ad wanted us all here, watching, like a show." Julia Simmons, sitting by the window, snorted. "Don't be dramatic, Pat. It was probably some idiot's idea of a joke, except it wasn't funny." Her voice was cool, but her fingers tapped the table, betraying her nerves. Philippa Hames, the quiet widow, sat silently, picking at her toast. Her blonde hair was neat, but her eyes were tired, like she hadn't slept. She glanced at Letitia, then down, as if afraid to speak. The doorbell rang, sharp and loud. Mitzi yelped, dropping a spoon. Letitia sighed and went to answer it. It was Inspector Craddock, his coat damp from the rain, with Sergeant Fletcher behind, him clutching a notebook. "Morning, Miss Blacklock," Craddock said, his voice calm but serious. "We need to talk to everyone again. Got some new information." Letitia led them to the drawing-room, where the picture over the bullet hole looked out of place. The household gathered. Dora fidgeting, Patrick sprawling, Julia stiff, Philippa silent, and Mitzi hovering in the doorway, muttering about police. Craddock sat, his sharp eyes scanning the room. "We've learned more about Rudy Schwez," he said. "He was a blackmailer, liked to dig up dirt on people at the Royal Spa Hotel. We found a note with your name, Miss Blacklock, and a woman's, Myrna Harris. He was asking about your past, especially your time with Randall Godler." Letitia's face stayed calm, but her hand tightened on her teacup. "I told you I didn't know him, and I don't know any Myrna Harris." Dora's eyes widened. "Randall Godler? Oh, Letty, that's from years ago. You worked for him in London, didn't you? Such a grand man, so rich." "Bunny, hush," Letitia said sharply. Dora's mouth snapped shut, her cheeks pink. Craddock's gaze flicked to Dora, then back to Letitia. Schwez was after something. Maybe money, maybe secrets. "We think he came here to scare you, or worse. But someone stopped him. The question is, who?" Patrick leaned forward, his grin gone. "You think one of us shot him? That's crazy. We were all in the dark, running around like chickens." "Someone turned off the lights," Craddock said. "Someone knew exactly what was happening." The room went quiet. Mitzi's muttering stopped, and she stared at the floor. Philippa's fingers twisted in her lap. Julia's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. Dora's hands shook so hard, her teacup rattled. Craddock stood. "We'll talk to each of you alone. Don't leave the village." As he left the room with Fletcher, Letitia's calm cracked for a moment. She touched her bandaged ear, her face pale. "This is nonsense," she muttered. "Just nonsense." But nobody believed her. Across the village, Miss Jane Marple sat in Mrs. Lucas's cosy cottage, her knitting needles clicking as she listened to the rain. Mrs. Lucas was feeling better, her cold almost gone, and she was full of gossip. "Jane, they say Rudy Schwez was a blackmailer. Mrs. Finch heard he was after Letitia's money. Can you imagine? And now the police are back at Little Paddocks." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, behind her gentle smile. "A blackmailer," she said softly. "That's interesting. Blackmailers need secrets, don't they? And secrets mean someone's hiding something." Mrs. Lucas leaned forward. "You think Letitia's hiding something? She's so proper, so kind. But Dora's always talking about that Godler fortune. Says Letitia's in line for it if Belle Godler dies, and Sonia's gone." Miss Marple's needles paused. "Sonia," she said, "the sister-in-law. Nobody knows where she is." "Not a clue," Mrs. Lucas said. "Vanished years ago. Some say she ran off, others say she's dead. If she's gone, Letitia gets everything. That's motive, isn't it?" Miss Marple nodded, her mind busy. Motive. Money was always a strong one. But blackmail meant Rudy Schwez knew something worth dying for. And that ad, announcing a murder, was no accident. It was a trap, set to catch someone. But who? She set her knitting down. I think I'll visit the tea room, she said. See what the village is saying. Mrs. Lucas chuckled. You're up to something, Jane. I know that look. Miss Marple smiled. Just an old lady's curiosity, dear. At the Bluebird tea room, the air was warm with the smell of scones and chatter. Miss Hinchcliffe and Miss Murgatroyd sat at their usual table, Hinchcliffe's boots muddy from her pig farm. It's a set-up, Hinchcliffe was saying, her voice gruff. That ad brought us all to Little Paddocks to watch. Someone wanted Letitia dead, or wanted us to think she was. Miss Murgatroyd, soft and nervous, clutched her teacup. Oh, Hinch, it's so awful. I keep thinking about the lights going out. I was by the sofa, and I swear I heard someone move near the door. Miss Marple, at a nearby table, sipped her tea, her ears sharp. Someone near the door. That was important. She didn't turn, but her knitting slowed as she listened. Mrs. Harmon bustled in, spotting Miss Marple. Jane, you're everywhere. Have you heard? The police think Rudy was a blackmailer. They're questioning everyone at Little Paddocks again. Miss Marple nodded. Poor Miss Blacklock. It must be dreadful. What do people say about her household? Those cousins, perhaps? Mrs. Harmon sat down, eager to talk. Patrick's a charmer, but shifty, some say. Julia's cold as ice. Nobody trusts her. And Philippa Hames, she's so quiet, but folks whisper she's got debts. As for Mitzi, she's a bundle of nerves, always screaming about danger. Miss Marple's eyes flickered. And Dora Bunner. She seems fond of Miss Blacklock. Oh, yes, Mrs. Harmon said. They're old friends like sisters. But Dora talks too much. Always going on about Letitia's past, the Godler money, makes people wonder. Miss Marple tucked that away. Dora's chatter was a clue and a danger. Someone who talked too much could spill secrets, and in this case, secrets could kill. Back at Little Paddocks, the afternoon dragged on, heavy with rain and worry. Letitia was in the drawing-room sorting letters, when Dora came in with a tray of sherry. I thought we could use a drink, Letty, she said, her voice shaky. All this talk of blackmail, it's dreadful. Letitia took a glass, her smile forced. You're too nervous, Bunny. It's just police business. They'll find out who Rudy was and why he came. Dora sipped her sherry, coughing a little. It's so strong, but it helps. Oh, Letty, I keep thinking about Randall Godler. You were so happy working for him. Do you think that man knew about the money? Letitia's hand froze on her glass. Don't talk nonsense, Dora. That was years ago. Nobody cares about it now. But Dora's eyes were misty. I care. You deserve that money, Letty, after all you've been through. Dora, stop! Letitia's voice was sharp, and Dora flinched, spilling a little sherry on her dress. I'm sorry, Dora mumbled, setting her glass down. I feel funny, dizzy. Letitia frowned. You've had too much sherry. Go lie down. Dora nodded, her steps wobbly as she left the room. Letitia stared at the sherry bottle, her heart pounding. Something wasn't right. She sniffed her own glass, but it smelled fine. Still, a cold fear settled in her chest. An hour later, Mitzi's scream shattered the quiet. Letitia ran upstairs, Patrick and Julia behind her. They found Dora in her room, sprawled on the bed, her face grey, her eyes staring blankly. A glass of sherry lay spilled on the floor, the smell sharp in the air. "She's dead!" Mitzi wailed, clutching the doorframe. "Poison! I know it! This house kills everyone!" Patrick checked Dora's pulse, his face pale. "She's gone," he whispered. "Aunt Letty, what's happening?" Letitia's hands shook as she stared at Dora's body. "Call the police," she said, her voice hoarse. "Now!" Julia stood frozen, her eyes wide. Philippa appeared in the doorway, her hands still dirty from the garden. "Dora!" she whispered, her voice breaking. The rain pounded outside. The house felt colder than ever. Letitia's mind raced. Dora, her oldest friend, was dead. And that sherry, it was meant for her. Inspector Craddock arrived quickly, his face grim as he examined the room. Sergeant Fletcher bagged the sherry, glass and bottle. "We'll test it," Craddock said. "Looks like poison. Cyanide, maybe. Smells like almonds." Letitia sat downstairs, her hands clenched. "That sherry was for me," she said. "Dora took my glass. She wasn't the target." Craddock's eyes narrowed. "You're sure?" Letitia nodded, her face pale. "Someone wants me dead. First, Rudy, now this." Patrick paced, his grin long gone. "This is crazy. Who's doing this? Why?" Julia's voice was cold. "Someone who knows about the money. That's what this is about, isn't it? The Godler fortune." Craddock turned to her. "What do you know about it?" Julia shrugged, but her eyes were guarded. "Just what Dora said. Aunt Letty's in line for it if Belle Godler dies, and Sonia's gone." Craddock made a note. "We'll look into that, and we're still tracking Myrna Harris. She might know why Schwez came here." Mitzi, sobbing in the kitchen, refused to come out. "I told you," she shouted. "This house is cursed. I leave tomorrow." Philippa sat quietly, her eyes on the floor. Letitia watched her, then looked away. The house felt like a trap, and everyone was caught in it. Miss Marple heard the news at the tea-room, where Mrs. Harmon rushed in, her face white. "Jane, it's terrible. Dora Bunner's dead. Poisoned, they say, at Little Paddocks. The police are there now." Miss Marple's knitting needles stopped. "Poisoned?" she said softly. "How dreadful." Mrs. Harmon nodded. "They think it was meant for Letitia. The sherry was laced. Dora drank it by mistake." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. A second death, and so soon. This wasn't just about Rudy Schwez. Someone was desperate, someone close. She thought of Dora's chatter, her talk of the Godler fortune. Dora knew too much, and now she was gone. "Mrs. Harmon," Miss Marple said. "Who was in the house when it happened?" Mrs. Harmon thought. "Letitia, Patrick, Julia, Philippa, Mitzi. Nobody else, I think. The police are questioning them all." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. The sherry was meant for Letitia, but Dora died. That meant the killer was in the house, or knew it well. And the Godler fortune was the key. Someone wanted Letitia out of the way, but why? Was it Patrick, with his shifty charm? Julia, with her cold eyes? Philippa, with her debts? Or even Mitzi, with her wild stories? She stood, tucking her knitting into her bag. "I'll visit Little Paddocks tomorrow," she said, "to offer "My condolences." Mrs. Harmon stared. "You're not scared, Jane, after 2 deaths?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Oh, I'm just an old lady who likes to help. And sometimes helping means listening." But as she walked home through the rain, her mind was sharp as a needle. The ad had started this, bringing death to Little Paddocks. And now, with Dora gone, the killer was getting bolder. Miss Marple knew one thing. The truth was close, hidden in the words and looks of those left behind. At Little Paddocks, the police were gone, but the house was silent. Letitia sat alone, staring at the sherry bottle now in police hands. Dora's laughter, her nervous chatter, was gone forever. Patrick and Julia were in their rooms, Philippa was outside, and Mitzi was packing her bags. Letitia's hand touched her bandaged ear. 2 attacks, 2 deaths. She wasn't safe, and neither was anyone else. Somewhere in this house, or in the village, a killer was watching, waiting for the next chance. Chapter 6. Unravelling Identities. The rain had stopped in Chipping Cleghorn, but the village felt heavy under a sky of thick clouds. Mud clung to boots, and the air smelled of wet grass and wood smoke. Little Paddocks was quieter than ever, like a house holding its breath after a scream. Dora Bunner's death had shaken everyone, and the news of poison in the sherry spread through the village like wildfire. 2 deaths in 2 days. First Rudy Schwez, shot in the drawing room, and now Dora, dead in her bed. The ad in the Gazette, announcing a murder, seemed more like a curse than a prank. Letitia Blacklock sat in the drawing room, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The picture covering the bullet hole was crooked, and the fire in the hearth did little to warm the chill in her bones. Her bandaged ear itched, a reminder of how close she'd come to death. Dora's absence was a heavy weight. She'd been her oldest friend, always chattering, always loyal. Now she was gone, and Letitia felt eyes watching her, even in her own house. Patrick Simmons slumped in a chair, his usual grin replaced by a frown. "This is getting out of hand, Aunt Letty," he said, rubbing his neck. "First that Schwez fellow, now Dora. Who's next?" Julia Simmons, standing by the window, turned sharply. "Don't be an idiot, Pat. Nobody's next if we keep our heads. The police will figure it out." Her voice was cool, but her fingers twisted a curtain, betraying her nerves. Philippa Hames sat quietly, her blonde hair neat, but her face pale. She'd been in the garden when Dora died, but the news had left her shaken. "It's awful," she said softly, her eyes on the floor. Dora was so kind. Why would anyone do this? Mitzi stormed in from the kitchen, her apron splattered with flour. "I tell you why," she cried, waving a wooden spoon. "This house is evil. Poison in the sherry. I drink nothing here, nothing. I leave tonight." Her dark eyes were wild, and her hands shook. "Mitzi, calm down," Letitia said, her voice firm but tired. "You're not leaving. We need you. The police are coming back, and we all need to stay put." Mitzi muttered something in her own language and stomped out, slamming the door. Patrick winced. "She's going to break something one of these days." Letitia didn't answer. Her mind was racing. The sherry was meant for her. She was sure of it. Dora had taken her glass by mistake, and now Dora was dead. Someone wanted her gone, and they weren't stopping. But why? Was it the Girdler fortune? like Julia said, or something else, something buried in her past? The doorbell rang, sharp and loud. Letitia stood smoothing her skirt. "That'll be the police," she said. "Let's get this over with." But it wasn't the police. It was Miss Jane Marple, her tweed coat damp from the morning mist, her umbrella tucked under her arm. Her white hair peeked out from under a neat hat, and her eyes sparkled with quiet curiosity. "Miss Blacklock," she said with a gentle smile, "I hope I'm not intruding. I heard about poor Miss Bunner and wanted to offer my condolences." Letitia forced a smile. "That's kind of you, Miss Marple. Come in. It's been a terrible day." She led Miss Marple to the drawing-room, where Patrick, Julia, and Philippa looked up, surprised. Mitzi peeked from the kitchen, her face suspicious. Miss Marple sat, her knitting bag in her lap, and looked around, her eyes lingering on the crooked picture over the bullet hole. "Such a tragedy," Miss Marple said, her voice soft. "First that young man, now your dear friend. It must be a shock." Letitia nodded, her hands tight. "It is. She meant a lot to me. The police think the sherry was poisoned. It was meant for me." Miss Marple's eyes widened, but her face stayed kind. "How dreadful. Poison is so sneaky, isn't it? Someone must know this house well to do such a thing." Patrick shifted in his chair, his face uneasy. "You think it's one of us? That's what the police keep hinting." "Oh, I'm just an old lady," Miss Marple said, her needles clicking. "But I've seen things in my village. People hide secrets, and secrets make them do strange things." Julia's eyes narrowed. "What kind of secrets? We're just a normal family here." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Are you? I heard you and Patrick are cousins, but not close ones. And Miss Hames, you're a lodger, yes? It's a big house with so many people coming and going. Hard to keep track of everyone." Philippa's cheeks flushed, but she didn't speak. Patrick laughed, but it sounded forced. "You're a sharp one, Miss Marple, but we're not hiding anything. Right, Aunt Letty?" Letitia's smile was tight. "Of course not. Miss Marple, would you like tea?" "No, thank you," Miss Marple said, her eyes on Letitia. "I was wondering about your time with Randall Godler. Mrs. Harmon mentioned you worked for him." "Wealthy man, wasn't he?" Letitia's hand froze on her chair. "That was years ago," she said. "I was his secretary, nothing more." Miss Marple nodded, but her mind was busy. She'd heard the village gossip. Letitia was in line for Godler's fortune if his wife Belle died and his sister-in-law Sonia was gone. Dora had talked about it too before she died. And Rudy Schwez, the blackmailer, had Letitia's name in his pocket. It all pointed to money, and someone who wanted it badly. At the police station, Inspector Cradle sat at his desk, a cup of cold coffee beside him. Sergeant Fletcher handed him a report, his face grim. "The sherry was laced with cyanide," Fletcher said. "Enough to kill fast. Dora Bunner drank it, but the bottle was meant for Miss Blacklock. Someone knew her. Habits." Craddock frowned, tapping his pen. "So the killer's close. Someone in the house, or someone who visits. And it's tied to Schwez. He was after Letitia, and now this." Fletcher nodded. "We found more on Schwez. Hotel staff say he was cosy with Myrna Harris, that woman. In the photo, she's a waitress at a cafe in Meddenham Wells. Nervous type, always looking over her shoulder. Schwez was asking her about Letitia Blacklock. said he knew her from years back, from her Godler days. Craddock's eyes narrowed. Knew her, or knew of her? What else? She didn't say much, Fletcher said, but Schwez bragged he had dirt on someone rich, said it'd make him a fortune. Then he turns up dead, and now Dora's gone. Craddock leaned back, his jaw tight. Blackmail. Schwez found something on Letitia, or thought he did. Maybe he wasn't working alone. That ad, the blackout, the poison, it's all planned, like a game. Fletcher scribbled a note. We're bringing Myrna Harris in for questioning. She might know what Schwez was after. Good, Craddock said, and check the household again. Patrick and Julia, Simmons, dig into their past, their cousins, but how distant? And Philippa Hames, any debts? Mitzi, too. She's jumpy, like she's hiding something. Back at Little Paddocks, Miss Marple sipped the tea Letitia insisted on making, her eyes wandering the room. The furniture was old but polished, the kind of things a wealthy woman might own. She thought of Randall Godler, a man who'd made millions in finance. Letitia had been his secretary, close to his secrets, and now, with Dora dead, those secrets were dangerous. Miss Blacklock, Miss Marple said, forgive an old lady's curiosity, but your cousins, Patrick and Julia, they've been with you a while? Letitia nodded, her face guarded. About a year. They're my late cousin's children. Not close family, but we get along. Miss Marple's needles clicked. And Miss Hames? She seems so quiet. She's a widow, Letitia said. Lost her husband in the war. She rents a room here, works as a gardener. She's no trouble. Miss Marple smiled. And Mitzi? She's quite spirited, Letitia sighed. Mitzi's dramatic, but she's a good worker. She's scared, that's all. The shooting, now Dora. It's too much for her. Miss Marple nodded, but her mind was racing. Patrick and Julia weren't close cousins, maybe not cousins at all. Philippa had debts, and debts made people desperate. Mitzi's fear seemed bigger than just nerves. And Letitia, her calm was like a mask, hiding something deeper. Patrick stood, stretching. I'm off to the pub, he said. Need to clear. My head. Julia followed, her eyes cold. I'm coming too. This house is suffocating. Philippa stood quietly. I'll be in the garden, she said, her voice barely a whisper. She left, her steps quick. Letitia watched them go, her face tight. Miss Marple set her tea down. You've had a lot to bear, she said, but you're strong. Stronger than most. Letitia's smile was faint. I have to be. This house, these people, they depend on me. Miss Marple stood, her knitting bag in hand. You're a good woman, Miss Blacklock, but be careful. Someone here isn't what they seem. Letitia's eyes flickered, but she said nothing. Miss Marple left, her umbrella tapping the floor, her mind buzzing. The Godler fortune was the key, she was sure. But who wanted it? And who was lying? In the village, the tea-room was packed with gossip. Mrs. Harmon waved Miss Marple over, her eyes wide. Jane, you were at Little Paddocks again. Did you see Letitia? Is she all right after Dora? She's managing, Miss Marple said, sitting down. But it's a sad house now. Tell me, what do people say about Patrick and Julia Simmons? Mrs. Harmon leaned in. They're a bit odd. Showed up a year ago, calling Letitia aunt. But Mrs. Swettenham says they're not in any family records. And Julia? She's so cold, like she's watching everyone." "And Philippa Hames?" Miss Marple asked. "Poor thing," Mrs. Harmon said. "Her husband left her with nothing. She's got a little boy in boarding school, and the bills are piling up. Letitia's been kind, but some say Philippa's desperate." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking. Desperate people did desperate things, and if Letitia was in line for a fortune, someone might want her out of the way, or want to take her place. Miss Hinchcliffe and Miss Murgatroyd were at their table, arguing quietly. "I'm telling you, Murgatroyd," Hinchcliffe said, "someone in that house is lying. The lights went out, and I heard footsteps by the door. Someone was moving before Schwed's even shouted." Miss Murgatroyd's eyes widened. "You think it was one of them, Patrick? Julia?" Miss Marple listened, her face calm, but her mind sharp. Footsteps by the door. That meant someone knew what was coming. Someone planned it. At the police station, Craddock got a call from Meddenham Wells. Myrna, Harris was in custody, nervous and tearful. "She says Schwez was obsessed with Letitia Blacklock," the officer said. "Claimed he knew her from years ago, when she worked for Godler. Said she wasn't who she seemed." Craddock's jaw tightened. Not who she seemed. What does that mean? She wouldn't say more, the officer said, but Schwez was after money. Said he had proof Letitia was hiding something big. Craddock hung up, his mind racing. Hiding something big. Was Letitia Blacklock not who she claimed? Was someone else in the house an impostor? He looked at Fletcher. "Get me everything on Letitia Blacklock's past, and the Simmons cousins. I want to know who they really are." Back at Little Paddocks, the evening was quiet, but the air was thick with fear. Letitia sat alone, a letter from Belle Godler in her hand. It was old, written years ago, promising her the fortune if Sonia was gone. She'd kept it hidden, but now it felt like a weight. Dora had known about it, and Dora was dead. Patrick and Julia were back, laughing in the hall, but their voices were strained. Philippa was in her room, her light off. Mitzi was packing, muttering about curses. Letitia folded the letter, her hands trembling. Rudy Schwez had known something. Maybe about her, maybe about Sonia. And now someone else in this house knew too. Outside the wind howled, and the clouds hid the stars. At Mrs. Lucas's cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting needles clicking. She was thinking about identities, how easy it was to wear a mask, to pretend to be someone else. Letitia Blacklock was at the centre of this. But was she the real Letitia? Or was someone else playing a part? The ad had started it all, bringing death to Little Paddocks. And now, with 2 people dead, Miss Marple knew the killer was close, maybe closer than anyone thought. Chapter 7. The Clue of the Lamp. The morning sun broke through the clouds over Chipping Cleghorn, casting weak light on the village's muddy lanes. The air smelled of wet leaves and fresh bread from the bakery, but the usual chatter of neighbours was hushed. 2 deaths in Little Paddocks, Rudy Schwez, shot in the drawing-room, and Dora Bunner, poisoned by sherry, had the village on edge. The strange ad in the Gazette, announcing a murder, now felt like a warning. People whispered in the tea-room and post office, their eyes darting to Little Paddocks, where the big house stood quiet but heavy with secrets. Inside, Letitia Blacklock sat at the breakfast table, her hands steady but her face pale. The scarf over her bandaged ear was neat, but her eyes were tired, like she hadn't slept. The picture covering the bullet hole in the drawing-room was still crooked, and the memory of Dora's grey face haunted her. She sipped her tea, watching the others, Patrick, Julia, and Philippa, eat in silence. The house felt empty without. Dora's nervous chatter, and the quiet was worse than any noise. Patrick Simmons pushed his plate away, his usual grin gone. "This place is like a tomb," he said, his voice low. "First that Schwed's fellow, now Dora. What's next, Aunt Letty?" Julia, Simmons, sitting by the window, rolled her eyes. "Stop it, Pat. You're not helping. The police will sort it out." Her voice was sharp, but her fingers tapped the table, restless. Philippa Hames, the quiet widow, stared at her toast, her blonde hair falling over her face. "It's awful," she whispered. "Dora didn't deserve this." "None of us do," Mitzi burst in from the kitchen, her apron twisted, her dark eyes wild. "I tell you, this house is cursed," she cried, waving a dish rag. "Poison in the sherry, bullets in the wall. I leave today, I swear." Her voice shook and she looked ready to bolt. "Mitzi, enough," Letitia said, her tone firm but weary. "You're staying. We need you. The police are coming again, and we all have to answer their questions." Mitzi muttered something sharp in her own language and stormed back to the kitchen, slamming the door. Patrick winced. "She's going to break every dish we own." Letitia didn't answer. Her mind was spinning. The sherry was meant for her. Dora had taken her glass by mistake. Rudy Schwed's had aimed at her too, or so it seemed. Someone wanted her dead, and they were close, too close. Was it the Gödler fortune? The money she might inherit if Belle Gödler died and Sonia was gone? Or was it something else, something buried deep in her past? The doorbell rang, cutting through the tension. Letitia stood, smoothing her skirt. "That'll be the police," she said. "Let's stay calm." But it wasn't the police. It was Miss Jane Marple, her tweed coat speckled with mist, her umbrella tucked under her arm. Her white hair peeked from under a neat hat, and her eyes sparkled with quiet curiosity. "Miss Blacklock," she said with a gentle smile, "I hope I'm not intruding. I wanted to see how you're managing after such a terrible loss." Letitia forced a smile, though her hands tightened. "You're kind, Miss Marple. Come in. It's been difficult." She led Miss Marple to the drawing-room, where Patrick, Julia, and Philippa looked up, surprised. Mitzi peeked from the kitchen, her face sour. Miss Marple sat, her knitting bag in her lap, her eyes flicking to the crooked picture and the lamp on the side table, a heavy brass thing with a green shade. "Such a tragedy," Miss Marple said, her voice soft. "Poor Miss Bunner, and so soon after that young man's death. It must feel like the house is under a cloud." Letitia nodded, her face tight. "It does. The police say the sherry was poisoned, cyanide. Dora drank it by mistake. It was meant for me." Miss Marple's eyes widened, but her smile stayed kind. "How dreadful! Poison is so cruel, isn't it? And the shooting, such a strange night. I heard the lights went out just before it happened." Patrick leaned forward, his eyes narrow. "Yeah, the lights. Someone flipped the switch. The police keep asking about it, like one of us did it." "Oh, I'm sure it was confusing," Miss Marple said, her needles clicking. "In my village, we had a burglary once, and the lights went out too. Turned out the thief knew the house well, knew exactly where the switch was." Julia's fingers stopped tapping. "You think someone here did it? That's what the police keep saying." Her voice was cold, but her eyes were sharp, watching Miss Marple. Miss Marple smiled faintly. "I'm just an old lady, dear. But things like that, lights, poison, they take planning. Someone who knows the house, maybe." The room went quiet. Philippa's hands twisted in her lap. Patrick shifted, uneasy. Letitia's smile was thin, like it might crack. Mitzi's muttering drifted from the kitchen, loud and angry. Miss Marple's eyes landed on the lamp. "What a lovely piece," she said, pointing to it. "Was it here that night?" Letitia nodded. "Yes, it's always there." "Why?" Miss Marple stood and walked to the lamp, her fingers brushing the cord. "Oh, just curious. Lamps can be tricky, can't they? Sometimes they flicker, or the cord gets loose." She bent down, peering at the plug. The cord was frayed, and the socket looked odd, like it had been tampered with. "My goodness," she said softly. "This doesn't look right. Was it like this before?" Letitia frowned, joining her. "I don't know. Mitzi might have moved it when she cleaned." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, but she didn't push. She sat back down, her needles clicking again. "Just a thought," she said. "In a blackout, a lamp can make all the difference." Patrick's face paled. "You think someone messed with it to make the lights go out?" "Oh, I wouldn't know," Miss Marple said, her voice light. "But it's funny how things get moved in a busy house." Letitia's hand touched her scarf, covering her bandaged ear. Her eyes darted to the lamp, then away. Miss Marple saw it, and her mind spun. The lamp was a clue. Someone had tampered with it to cause the blackout. Someone who knew exactly what Rudy Schwedz was planning. At the police station, Inspector Craddock pored over a new report, his coffee cold and forgotten. Sergeant Fletcher stood by, flipping through his notebook. "The lamp in the drawing-room," Fletcher said. "We checked it this morning. The cord's been tampered with, cut and spliced to short the circuit. That's what caused the blackout." Craddock's eyes narrowed. So someone in the house set it up. They knew Schwedz was coming and wanted it dark. Fletcher nodded. "And the sherry. Cyanide, no doubt. The bottle was clean, but Dora's glass had traces. Whoever did it knew Letitia's habits, knew she'd drink it." Craddock leaned back, his jaw tight. "This is personal. Schwedz was a blackmailer, after Letitia's secrets. Dora was collateral, maybe because she talked too much about the Godler fortune." Fletcher handed him a photo. "Myrna Harris. We found her. She's at the station now. Says Schwedz bragged about a big score. Something about Letitia not being who she seems. Said he had proof, but he never showed her." Craddock stared at the photo. A young blonde woman, nervous and pale. "Not who she seems," he muttered. "Is Letitia Blacklock hiding something? Or is someone else in that house?" He stood, grabbing his coat. "Let's go to Little Paddocks. I want to see that lamp myself." Back at Little Paddocks, Craddock and Fletcher arrived, their boots muddy from the lane. Letitia let them in, her face calm, but her eyes wary. The household gathered in the drawing-room. Patrick slouching, Julia stiff, Philippa silent, Mitzi hovering with a scowl. Craddock held up the lamp's cord, now in a plastic bag. "This was tampered with," he said. "Someone cut it to make. The lights go out the night Schwez died. Who was near it before the blackout?" The room went still. Patrick shrugged. "I don't know. We were all over the place, setting up for the party." Julia's eyes flicked to the lamp, then away. "It's an old house. Things break." Philippa's hands twisted, but she said nothing. Mitzi burst out. "I cleaned that lamp. I not touch wires. I not do this." Craddock's gaze moved to Letitia. "Miss Blacklock, you were by the fireplace when the lights went out. Did you see anyone near the lamp?" Letitia shook her head. "No, it was crowded. People were moving around." Craddock nodded, but his eyes were sharp. "We're also looking into your past, Miss Blacklock. Schwez was asking about your time with Randall Godler. Said you weren't who you seemed." Letitia's face paled, but her voice stayed steady. "That's nonsense. I was his secretary, nothing more." Patrick laughed, but it sounded nervous. "What? You think Aunt Lettie's some impostor? That's crazy." Miss Marple, still sitting quietly, spoke up. "In my village, we had a man who pretended to be someone else. Wanted money, you see. People will do a lot for a fortune." The room froze. Julia's eyes narrowed. "What are you saying, Miss Marple? That someone here's lying?" "Oh, I'm just an old lady," Miss Marple said, her needles clicking. "But secrets have a way of coming out." Craddock watched the exchange, his mind racing. The lamp was proof someone in this house was working with Schwez, or against him, and Dora's death wasn't an accident. He turned to Fletcher. "Bag the lamp. We'll test it for prints." As the police left, Letitia's hands shook. She looked at the others, Patrick's uneasy frown, Julia's cold stare, Philippa's silence, Mitzi's muttering. Someone here was a liar, maybe a killer, and she was running out of time. In the village, Miss Marple walked to the tea-room, her umbrella tapping the pavement. The air was thick with gossip, and Mrs. Harmon waved her over. "Jane, the police found something about the lamp. It was tampered with, they say. Someone made the lights go out." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "That's interesting, dear. It means someone planned it all. The ad, the blackout, the shooting." Mrs. Harmon's eyes widened. "You think it's someone in the house? Patrick? Julia?" Miss Marple's needles clicked. "Maybe. Or someone who knows the house well, like a guest or a worker." She thought of Mitzi, so quick to scream about curses, and Philippa, with her debts and quiet eyes, Patrick and Julia, who might not be cousins at all, and Letitia, calm, steady Letitia, who might not be who she claimed. At the post office, Mrs. Finch leaned over the counter. "Miss Marple, they're saying Letitia's not herself. That Schwez fellow thought she was hiding something big, maybe her name." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "People often hide things, dear. Names, pasts, motives. But they can't hide forever." Her mind was spinning. The lamp was the key. It proved the killer was close, someone who knew the house's wiring. And Schwez's talk of Letitia not being who she seemed pointed to a deeper secret. Was Letitia an impostor? Or was someone else in the house playing a part? At Little Paddocks the evening was quiet, but the air was thick with fear. Letitia sat alone, a letter from Belle Godler in her hand. It was old, promising her the fortune if Sonia was gone. Dora had known about it, and now Dora was dead. She folded the letter, her hands trembling. Patrick and Julia were in the hall, whispering. Philippa was in her room, her light off. Mitzi was in the kitchen, packing her bags again. Letitia's eyes drifted to the lamp, now gone with the police. Someone had cut that cord. Someone who wanted the dark. Someone who wanted her dead. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. At Mrs. Lucas's cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, her knitting needles clicking. She was thinking about lamps, about secrets, about names. The ad had brought death to Little Paddocks, and now the killer was moving faster. She knew one thing. The truth was close, hidden in the shadows of that house. Chapter 8. A Tragic Oversight. The sun hung low over Chipping Cleghorn, painting the village in soft gold, but the warmth couldn't touch the chill that had settled in. 3 days after Dora Bunner's poisoning, the village was a tangle of whispers and fear. Rudy Schwetz's shooting and Dora's death had shaken everyone, and the strange ad in the Gazette, "A murder is announced," felt like a dark promise kept. Little Paddocks stood at the edge of town, its ivy-covered walls hiding secrets that grew heavier by the day. Inside, Letitia Blacklock moved through the house like a shadow, her bandaged ear hidden under a scarf. The drawing room, with its crooked picture covering the bullet hole, felt empty without Dora's nervous chatter. The tampered lamp, now with the police, was proof someone in the house had planned the blackout that night. Letitia's eyes were tired, her hands unsteady, as she poured tea. She knew someone wanted her dead, and the thought made her stomach twist. Patrick Simmons sat at the breakfast table, his usual grin gone. "This place is a nightmare, Aunt Letty," he said, pushing his eggs around. "First Schwez, then Dora. What's next?" Julia Simmons, by the window, snapped, "Stop whining, Pat! The police are sniffing around, and you're not helping with that attitude." Her voice was sharp, but her fingers twisted a handkerchief, betraying her nerves. Philippa, Hames, the quiet widow, sipped her tea in silence, her blonde hair neat, but her face pale. She hadn't said much since Dora's death, but her eyes darted to the door, as if expecting trouble. Mitzi, in the kitchen, was banging pots, her muttering loud enough to carry. "I leave this cursed house," she shouted. "Poison, guns, I not stay for more." Letitia sighed, her voice firm but weary. "Mitzi, you're not going anywhere. The police need us here. We all answer their questions, and this will end." But the house felt like a trap, and everyone knew it. The lamp's tampered cord, the poisoned sherry, the ad. It all pointed to someone close, someone who knew Letitia's habits and the house's corners. Across the village, Miss Jane Marple walked along the lane, her umbrella tapping the ground. The air smelled of damp leaves and chimney smoke, and the village was alive with gossip. She wore a tweed coat and a neat hat, her white hair fluffy as a cloud. Her eyes sparkled with quiet curiosity, taking in every detail. The baker's boy whistling, the postman's heavy bag, the curtains twitching as neighbours peeked out. She'd heard about the lamp from Mrs. Harmon, who'd heard it from the butcher, who'd heard it from Sergeant Fletcher. A tampered cord meant a planned blackout, and that meant the killer was no stranger. Miss Marple headed to the tea-room, where Miss Hinchcliffe and Miss Murgatroyd sat at their usual table. Hinchcliffe, sturdy and gruff, was talking loudly, her boots muddy from her pig farm. "I'm telling you, Murgatroyd, it's someone in that house. The lamp was fixed to go dark, and Schwez was part of it. But who?" Miss Murgatroyd, soft and round, clutched her teacup, her face nervous. "Oh, Hinch, I keep thinking about that night. The lights went out and everyone was moving. But I swear I saw something, or didn't see something." Miss Marple, at a nearby table, sipped her tea, her knitting needles clicking. Her ears perked up. Didn't see something. That was important. She didn't turn, but her needles slowed as she listened. Hinchcliffe frowned. "What do you mean, didn't see something? You were by the sofa, weren't you?" Murgatroyd nodded, her eyes wide. "Yes, but it's fuzzy. I was looking at the door when the lights went out. I thought everyone was in the room, but now I'm not sure someone wasn't there, someone who should have been." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face stayed calm. She set her tea down and leaned closer, pretending to adjust her hat. "Excuse me, Miss Murgatroyd," she said softly. "I couldn't help overhearing. You say someone was missing that night?" Murgatroyd blinked, startled. "Oh, Miss Marple, I don't know. It's just a feeling. I can't place it. Everyone was moving. And then the shots." Hinchcliffe cut in, her voice gruff. "She's been trying to remember all morning. Keeps saying something's off, but she can't pin it down." Miss Marple smiled gently. "Memories are tricky, aren't they? Sometimes they come back when you least expect. If you think of anything, dear, do tell the police. It could be important." Murgatroyd nodded, her face pale. "I'll try. It's scary, thinking someone we know did this." Miss Marple's needles clicked again. Scary, yes, but crucial. If Murgatroyd was right, someone wasn't in the room when Schwez was shot. That person turned off the lights, or pulled the trigger. At Little Paddocks, Inspector Craddock arrived, his coat damp from a light drizzle. Sergeant Fletcher followed, his notebook ready. Letitia let them in, her face tight but polite. Household gathered in the drawing-room. Patrick slouching, Julia stiff, Philippa silent, Mitzi hovering with a scowl. Craddock held up a photo of Myrna Harris, the blonde woman from Schwez's wallet. "We found her," he said. "She says Schwez was after you, Miss Blacklock. Claimed you were hiding something big, something about your time with Randall Godler. Said you weren't who you seemed." Letitia's hand froze on her teacup. "That's nonsense," she said, her voice steady but sharp. "I was his secretary. I've told you that." Patrick laughed, but it sounded forced. "What, you think Aunt Lettie's some fake? That's ridiculous." Julia's eyes narrowed. Why would Schwez care about her past? He was a crook, probably just fishing for money. Craddock's gaze moved to Philippa. "Mrs. Hames, you were by the sofa that night. Did you see anyone near the lamp?" Philippa's cheeks flushed, but she shook her head. "No, it was dark. Everyone was moving." Mitzi burst out. "I was in kitchen. I not touch lamp. I not touch anything." Her hands shook and she looked ready to run. Craddock nodded, his eyes sharp. "We're testing the lamp for prints, and we're digging into everyone's past. If anyone's hiding something, we'll find it." As the police left, Letitia's hands trembled. She looked at the others. Patrick's uneasy frown, Julia's cold stare, Philippa's silence, Mitzi's muttering. Someone in this house was lying, and Dora's death proved they wouldn't stop. That afternoon, Miss Murgatroyd was at home. a small cottage she shared with Miss Hinchcliffe. The rain had started again, tapping the windows as she sat by the fire, her hands twisting in her lap. Hinchcliffe was out, checking the pigs, and the quiet let Murgatroyd's mind wander back to that night at Little Paddocks. She closed her eyes, picturing the drawing-room, the guests chatting, the tea trays, the fire crackling. Then the lights went out, and Shwed shouted, "Hands up!" She'd been by the sofa, frozen when the shots rang out. But something was wrong. She opened her eyes, her heart pounding. "Someone wasn't there," she whispered. "I didn't see them by the door." She stood pacing. Who was it? Letitia? No, she was by the fireplace. Patrick? Julia? Philippa? Her mind raced, trying to place everyone. Then it hit her. She hadn't seen one person when the lights went out. They were gone, just for a moment, before the shots. "I've got it," she said, her voice loud in the empty room. "I know who wasn't there." She grabbed her coat, meaning to call Hinchcliffe or the police. But as she reached the door, a shadow moved outside. The knob turned slowly, and her breath caught. "Who's there?" she called, her voice shaking. The door creaked open, and a figure stepped in, their face hidden by a hood. Murgatroyd's eyes widened. "You—" she started, but her words became a gasp as a scarf tightened around her neck. She clawed at it, her feet kicking, but the grip was strong. The room spun, and the fire's light faded as she fell to the floor, still. Hours later, Miss Hinchcliffe found her, sprawled by the door, the scarf loose around her neck. "Murgatroyd!" she shouted, dropping to her knees. She shook her friend, but Murgatroyd's eyes stared blankly, her face grey. Hinchcliffe's hands shook as she checked for a pulse. Nothing. She ran to the phone, her voice hoarse as she called the police. "It's Murgatroyd," she said. "She's dead, strangled. Get here now." Inspector Craddock arrived at the cottage, his face grim. The rain had stopped, but the air was heavy with damp. Fletcher was already there, sketching the scene. Murgatroyd's body lay by the door, the scarf, a blue wool one, beside her. "No, struggle marks," Fletcher said. "She didn't have time to fight." Craddock knelt, his jaw tight. "She knew something. That's why she's dead." Hinchcliffe, her eyes red, stood by the fire. "She was trying to remember," she said, her voice breaking. "Kept saying someone wasn't in the room when the lights went out. She figured it out this morning, but she didn't tell me who." Craddock's eyes narrowed. "Someone missing? That's the key. Whoever wasn't there turned off the lights, or shot Shwez." Hinchcliffe clenched her fists. "Find them! Find who did this to her." Miss Marple heard the news at Mrs. Lucas's cottage, where Mrs. Harmon burst in, her face white. "Jane, it's awful! Miss Murgatroyd's dead, strangled at her cottage. Hinchcliffe found her." Miss Marple's knitting needle stopped, her heart sinking. "Strangled?" she said softly. "How terrible! Did she say anything before?" Harmon nodded, her voice shaky. "Hinchcliffe says she was remembering that night at Little Paddocks. Said someone wasn't in the room when the lights went out. She figured it out, Jane, and now she's gone." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, but her face stayed calm. "Someone wasn't there," she murmured. "That's what the killer didn't want her to say." She stood, her knitting bag in hand. "I'll visit Miss Hinchcliffe tomorrow." "She said to offer my condolences." Mrs. Harmon stared. You're not scared, Jane? 3 deaths now." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "I'm just an old lady who likes to help, and sometimes helping means noticing things." But as she sat by the fire that night, her mind was sharp as a blade. Murgatroyd's memory was the key. Someone missing from the room meant the killer was there, setting up the blackout or pulling the trigger. She thought of Letitia, calm but scared, Patrick with his shifty grin, Julia, cold and watchful, Philippa, quiet and desperate, Mitzi, always screaming about curses. One of them wasn't who they seemed, and Murgatroyd had paid the price for seeing it. At Little Paddocks, the news of Murgatroyd's death hit like a stone. Letitia sat in the drawing room, her hands clenched. Patrick paced, his face pale. 3 deaths, he said. "This is insane. Who's doing this?" Julia's voice was cold. "Someone who wants the money. It's always about the money, isn't it? The Godler fortune." Philippa's eyes flicked up, then down. "Murgatroyd was nice," she whispered. "She didn't hurt anyone." Mitzi burst in, her apron twisted. "I told you, this village is cursed. I leave now, before I die too." She ran to her room, slamming the door. Letitia stood, her voice steady, but her hands shaking. "Nobody's leaving. The police will be here soon. We stay together." But as she looked at the others, her heart pounded. Someone in this house was a killer. The lamp, the sherry, now Murgatroyd's scarf. They were closing in, and she was still the target. At the police station, Craddock pored over the lamp's report. No clear prints, but the cut cord was deliberate. He looked at Fletcher. "Murgatroyd knew who was missing. That's why she's dead. We need to talk to everyone who was at Little Paddocks that night." Fletcher nodded. "And Myrna Harris? She's still at the station, scared stiff. Says Schwez was sure Letitia was hiding something big. Maybe her name." Craddock's jaw tightened. "Then we dig deeper. Letitia Blacklock, the Simmons cousins, Philippa Hames. Someone's not who they say, and they're killing to keep it secret." Outside, the village was dark, the stars hidden by clouds. At Mrs. Lucas's cottage, Miss Marple's needles clicked, her mind racing. Murgatroyd's last words. Someone wasn't there. The killer was close, hiding in plain sight, and Miss Marple was determined to find them before they struck again. Chapter 9. The Hidden Air. The air in Chipping Cleghorn was heavy with the threat of more rain, the sky a dull grey that matched the village's mood. It was Monday, and the village was quieter than ever, as if scared to speak too loudly. 3 deaths. Rudy Schwez, shot in Little Paddocks. Dora Bunner, poisoned by sherry. And now Miss Murgatroyd, strangled in her cottage, had turned the cosy town into a place of whispers and locked doors. The strange ad in the Gazette announcing a murder was no longer a mystery, but a grim truth. At Little Paddocks, the big house stood like a fortress, its ivy-covered walls hiding secrets that grew darker with each passing day. Letitia Blacklock sat in the drawing-room, her hands folded tightly, her bandaged ear hidden under a scarf. The picture over the bullet hole was still crooked, and the absence of the tampered lamp left a gap on the side table. Dora's laughter and Murgatroyd's nervous chatter were gone, replaced by a silence that pressed against the walls. Letitia's face was calm, but her eyes were sharp, watching every movement. She knew the killer was close, too close, and the thought made her heart race. Patrick Simmons paced the room, his usual grin replaced by a scowl. "This is madness, Aunt Letty," he said, his voice low. "3 people dead. The police are all over us, and that old lady, Miss Marple, keeps poking around. What's next?" Julia Simmons, leaning against the window, snapped, "Stop it, Pat! You're making it worse. The police will figure it out, and we'll be done with this." Her voice was sharp, but her fingers twisted a curtain, betraying her unease. Philippa Hames sat quietly, her blonde hair neat, but her face pale. She hadn't spoken much since Murgatroyd's death, but her eyes flicked to the door, as if expecting someone to burst in. "It's awful," she whispered. "Murgatroyd was kind. Who would do this?" Mitzi stormed in from the kitchen, her apron crumpled, her dark eyes wild. "I tell you, this house is cursed," she cried, waving a dish rag. 3 deaths. Pack my bags today. I not die next." Her voice shook, and she looked ready to run. "Mitzi, sit down," Letitia said, her tone firm but tired. "Nobody's dying next. The police are coming again, and we need to stay calm." Mitzi muttered something sharp and stomped out, slamming the door. Patrick winced. She's going to break everything before she leaves. Letitia didn't answer. Her mind was spinning. The sherry was meant for her. Dora had died by mistake, and now Murgatroyd was gone, because she'd remembered something. Someone missing from the room when the lights went out. The tampered lamp proved the killer knew the house. Someone wanted her dead, and it was tied to the Godler fortune. She was sure of it. The doorbell rang, sharp and loud. Letitia stood, smoothing her skirt. "That'll be the police," she said. "Let's get this over with." But it was Miss Jane Marple, her tweed coat damp from the mist, her umbrella tucked under her arm, her white hair peeked from under a neat hat, and her eyes sparkled with quiet curiosity. "Miss Blacklock," she said with a gentle smile, "I hope I'm not intruding. I heard about Miss Murgatroyd and wanted to offer my condolences." Letitia forced a smile, though her hands tightened. "You're kind, Miss Marple. Come in. It's been a terrible time." She led Miss Marple to the drawing-room, where Patrick, Julia, and Philippa looked up, surprised. Mitzi peeked from the kitchen, her face sour. Miss Marple sat, her knitting bag in her lap, her eyes flicking to the crooked picture and the empty spot where the lamp had been. "Such a tragedy," Miss Marple said, her voice soft. "Poor Miss Murgatroyd, and so soon after Miss Bunner. It must feel like the world's turned upside down." Letitia nodded, her face tight. "It does. The police say Murgatroyd was strangled because she remembered something. Someone missing from the room that night." Miss Marple's needles clicked, her face calm, but her mind sharp. "Missing," she said softly. "That's important, isn't it? Someone wasn't where they should have been when the lights went out." Patrick shifted uneasy. "You think that's the killer? The one who wasn't there?" "Oh, I'm just an old lady," Miss Marple said, her smile gentle. "But in my village I've seen things. People move in the dark when they don't want to be seen." Julia's eyes narrowed. "You're saying one of us did it? That's what the police keep hinting." Her voice was cold, but her fingers twisted tighter. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "I'm only saying memories matter. Miss Murgatroyd saw something, or didn't see something, and it cost her life." The room went quiet. Philippa's hands, twisted in her lap. Patrick's scowl deepened. Letitia's smile was thin, like it might break. Mitzi's muttering drifted from the kitchen, loud and angry. Miss Marple's gaze landed on Letitia. "Miss Blacklock," she said, "forgive my curiosity, but your time with Randall Godler, Mrs. Harmon mentioned you were close to him. And his fortune, it's quite a sum, isn't it?" Letitia's hand froze on her chair. "That was years ago," she said, her voice steady but sharp. "I was his secretary. The fortune goes to his wife Belle. If she dies and Sonia's gone, I might inherit. But that's all gossip." Miss Marple nodded, but her mind was racing. She'd been thinking about the Girdler fortune, about Rudy Schwetz's note with Letty, on it, about Myrna Harris saying Letitia wasn't who she seemed. And then there was Philippa, quiet and pale, with debts piling up. Something didn't fit. "Miss Hames," Miss Marple said, turning to Philippa, "you've been so quiet. It must be hard, living here with all this trouble." Philippa's cheeks flushed, but her voice was soft. "It is. I lost my husband in the war. I have a son in boarding school, and it's hard to pay the bills. Miss Blacklock's been kind, letting me stay." Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her mind was sharp. "A son," she said. "How lovely. And his name?" "Pip," Philippa said, her voice barely a whisper. "He's 6. Miss Marple's needles paused. Pip. A name that rang a bell, though she couldn't place it. She thought of Sonia Godler, Randall's sister-in-law, who'd vanished years ago. Sonia had a child, didn't she? A child who'd inherit before Letitia. Her heart quickened, but her face stayed calm. At the police station, Inspector Craddock sat at his desk, a pile of papers in front of him. Sergeant Fletcher handed him a new report, his face grim. "Myrna Harris talked," Fletcher said. "Says Schwez was sure Letitia Blacklock wasn't Letitia. Claimed she was someone else, hiding, for the Godler money. He had proof, a letter, maybe, but he never showed her." Craddock's eyes narrowed. "Not Letitia. Then who?" Fletcher shrugged. Myrna didn't know, but Schwez was digging into her past, asking about her time with Godler. Said she had a sister, Charlotte, who died years ago. Craddock leaned back, his jaw tight. "A sister, Charlotte Blacklock. If Letitia's not Letitia, could she be Charlotte?" Fletcher nodded. "Possible. We checked old records. Charlotte Blacklock had a goiter, big scar on her neck. She went abroad for surgery, then died, or so the story goes. Letitia came back to England after, took over the family name." Craddock's mind raced. So, if Letitia's really Charlotte, she's hiding it. Why? To get the Godler fortune. Fletcher handed him a photo. "And there's this, found in Schwetz's room. It's Letitia Blacklock, years ago, with Randall Godler. But look at her neck, no scar." Craddock stared at the photo, his heart pounding. If she's Charlotte, she's been playing Letitia all this time, and Schwez knew. He stood, grabbing his coat. "We're going to Little Paddocks, and we're digging into Philippa Hames. Myrna said Schwez mentioned a Pip, could be her son." Back at Little Paddocks, Miss Marple sipped tea, her eyes wandering the room. She'd been thinking about Charlotte Blacklock, the sister who died, and Pip, Philippa's son. The pieces were falling together, like a puzzle taking shape. She stood, her knitting bag in hand. "Thank you for the tea, Miss Blacklock," she said. "I'll let you rest." Letitia walked her to the door, her face tight. "You're very kind, Miss Marple, but please don't believe all the gossip." Miss Marple smiled. "Oh, I never do, dear. But truth has a way of coming out." As she left, her mind was buzzing. Charlotte Blacklock had a goiter, fixed by surgery abroad. Letitia had no scar, but she was nervous when the Girdler fortune came up, and Philippa, her son Pip, could be Sonia Girdler's child, the true heir. If Letitia was Charlotte, pretending to be Letitia, she'd kill to keep that secret. And Dora and Murgatroyd had died for knowing too much. In the village, Miss Marple stopped at the tea-room, where Mrs. Harmon waved her over. "Jane, you were at Little Paddocks again. Any news? The whole village is talking about Murgatroyd." Miss Marple sat, her needles clicking. "It's dreadful, dear. Miss Murgatroyd remembered something, someone missing from the room. That's why she's gone." Mrs. Harmon's eyes widened. "You think the killer's in the house? Patrick? Julia?" Miss Marple's smile was faint. "Maybe, or someone who knows the house well. Tell me, what do people say about Philippa Hames?" Mrs. Harmon leaned in. "She's quiet, poor thing. War widow with a little boy, Pip. She's got debts, big ones. Letitia's been kind, but some say Philippa's desperate." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. Pip, Sonia Girdler's child, would be about that age. If Philippa was Sonia's daughter, married under a new name, her son would be the heir, and if Letitia, Charlotte knew, she'd have a reason to kill. At the post office, Mrs. Finch leaned over the counter. "Miss Marple, they're saying Letitia's not who she seems. Schwez thought she was hiding her name. Maybe for the money." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "People hide things, dear, but they can't hide forever." At Little Paddocks, Craddock arrived, his face grim. Letitia let him in, her hands trembling. The household gathered, Patrick pacing, Julia cold, Philippa silent, Mitzi muttering in the kitchen. Craddock held up the photo of Letitia with Girdler. "Miss Blacklock, this is you, years ago. No scar on your neck, but Charlotte Blacklock. Your sister had one. Care to explain?" Letitia's face paled, but her voice stayed steady. "That's me. I had surgery abroad for a goiter. The scar's faint now." Craddock's eyes narrowed. "Surgery? Or are you Charlotte, pretending to be Letitia?" Schwez thought so. "He was blackmailing you, wasn't he?" Patrick laughed, nervous. "This is crazy. Aunt Lettie's no imposter." Julia's voice was sharp. "Why would Schwez care? He was a crook, after money." Craddock turned to Philippa. "Mrs. Hames, your son's name is Pip. Sonia Girdler had a child named Pip. Any connection?" Philippa's hands shook, her eyes wide. "No," she whispered. "My husband was Philip Hames. Pip's named after him." Craddock nodded, but his eyes were sharp. "We'll check. If you're Sonia's daughter, you're the true heir to the Girdler fortune." The room went still. Letitia's face was white. Patrick stopped pacing. Julia's eyes narrowed. Mitzi's muttering stopped. That night, Miss Marple sat by Mrs. Lucas's fire, her needles clicking. She'd pieced it together. Letitia was Charlotte, hiding her identity to claim the fortune. Philippa was Sonia's daughter, the real heir. Schwez had known, and Dora and Murgatroyd had died for getting too close to the truth. The killer was in Little Paddocks, and Miss Marple knew she had to act fast. At Little Paddocks, Letitia sat, alone, the old letter from Belgodler in her hand. Her secret was slipping out, and the killer was closer than ever. The wind howled outside, and the house felt like a cage, waiting for the next strike. Chapter 10. The final truth. The village of Chipping Cleghorn was still under a heavy grey sky, the air thick with the promise of more rain. It was Tuesday, and the quiet streets felt like they were holding their breath. 3 deaths. Rudy Schwed's, shot in Little Paddocks. Dora Bunner, poisoned by sherry, and Miss Murgatroyd, strangled in her cottage, had turned the cosy town into a place of fear. The ad in the Gazette announcing a murder had come true, and now everyone looked at their neighbours with suspicion. Little Paddocks stood at the edge of the village, its windows dark, its secrets ready to spill. Inside, Letitia Blacklock sat in the drawing-room, her hands clenched so tight her knuckles were white. The scarf over her bandaged ear was neat, but her face was pale, her eyes darting to every shadow. The picture covering the bullet hole was crooked, and the empty spot where the tampered lamp once stood felt like a warning. Dora's chatter, Murgatroyd's nervous voice. They were gone, and the house was too quiet, like it was waiting for something worse. Patrick Simmons slumped in a chair, his usual grin replaced by a frown. "This is a nightmare, Aunt Letty," he said, his voice low. "The police are closing in, and that Miss Marple, she's everywhere, asking questions. What's going to happen?" Julia Simmons, by the window, snapped, "Stop it, Pat. You're making everyone jumpy. The police will figure it out, and we'll be done with this." Her voice was sharp, but her fingers twisted a curtain, showing her nerves. Philippa Hames sat quietly, her blonde hair neat, but her face pale. Her hands rested in her lap, but they trembled slightly. She'd been silent since the police asked about her son Pip and the Godler fortune. Her eyes stayed on the floor, as if she was afraid to look up. Mitzi burst in from the kitchen, her apron twisted, her dark eyes wild. "I tell you, this house is evil!" she cried, waving a wooden spoon. 3 deaths! I pack my bags. I leave now. I not wait for more." Her voice shook, and she looked ready to bolt. "Mitzi, sit down," Letitia said, her tone firm but weary. "Nobody's leaving. The police are coming today, and we need to stay together." Mitzi muttered something angry and stomped out, slamming the door. Patrick winced. "She's going to break every dish we have." Letitia didn't answer. Her mind was racing. The police knew about her past, her sister Charlotte and the Godler fortune. They'd asked about Philippa's son Pip and Sonia Godler, the missing heir. She'd been careful, so careful, but the truth was slipping out. Someone in this house was a killer, and they were after her, or the money she stood to gain. Doorbell rang, sharp and loud. Letitia stood smoothing her skirt. "That's the police," she said. "Let's stay calm." But it was Miss Jane Marple, her tweed coat damp from the morning mist, her umbrella tucked under her arm, her white hair peeked from under a neat hat, and her eyes sparkled with quiet wisdom. Behind her stood Inspector Craddock, his face grim, and Sergeant Fletcher, clutching a notebook. "Miss Blacklock," Miss Marple said with a gentle smile, "I hope we're not intruding. We need to talk about everything." Letitia's heart skipped, but she forced a smile. "Of course. Come in." She led them to the drawing-room, where Patrick, Julia, and Philippa looked up, tense. Mitzi peeked from the kitchen, her face sour. Miss Marple sat, her knitting bag in her lap, her eyes flicking to the crooked picture. Craddock stood, his hands in his pockets, his gaze sharp. "We've learned a lot," Craddock said, his voice calm but firm. "About Rudy Schwez, Dora Bunner, Miss Murgatroyd, and you, Miss Blacklock. It's time to tell the truth." Letitia's hands tightened. "I've told you everything," she said, her voice steady but thin. Miss Marple's needles clicked, her smile kind but her eyes sharp. "Have you, dear? In my village, I've seen people hide things, names, pasts, truths. But they always come out." Patrick shifted, uneasy. "What's this about? You think Aunt Lettie's hiding something?" Craddock held up a photo, the one of Letitia with Randall Godler years ago, her neck smooth, no scar. "This is you, Miss Blacklock. But Charlotte Blacklock, your sister, had a goiter, a big scar from surgery. You don't. Care to explain?" Letitia's face paled, but she didn't flinch. "I had surgery too," she said. "The scar's faint now." Miss Marple's voice was soft. "But you're not Letitia, are you? You're Charlotte Blacklock. Letitia died years ago, abroad, after her surgery. You took her place, didn't you? To claim the Godler fortune." The room went still. Patrick's jaw dropped. Julia's eyes widened. Philippa's hands froze in her lap. Mitzi's muttering stopped, and she stared from the doorway. Letitia, Charlotte, laughed, but it sounded forced. "That's ridiculous. I'm Letitia Blacklock. My sister died, yes, but I'm not her." Craddock's eyes narrowed. "Rudy Schwez didn't think so. He was blackmailing you, wasn't he? He knew you were Charlotte, pretending to be Letitia. That's why he came here with that ad and his gun." Charlotte's hands shook, but she held her ground. "Schwez was a crook. He made it up to get money." Miss Marple's needles clicked faster. "But he wasn't alone, was he? Someone's in this house helped him. Someone tampered with the lamp to make the lights go out. Someone poisoned the sherry meant for you. And when Dora Bunner and Miss Murgatroyd got too close to the truth, they died." Julia stood, her voice cold. "You're saying one of us is the killer? That's insane." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Is it? Miss Murgatroyd remembered something. Someone missing from the room when the lights went out. That person wasn't just missing. They were making sure the plan worked." Craddock turned to Philippa, his voice gentle but firm. "Mrs. Hames, your son's name is Pip. Sonia Godler, Randall's sister-in-law, had a child named Pip. You're her daughter, aren't you? The true heir to the Godler fortune." Philippa's face went white, her hands trembling. "No," she whispered. "My husband was Philip Hames. Pip's named after him." Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice kind. "But you're Sonia's daughter, aren't you, dear? You married under a new name, hid your past to protect your son. If Charlotte knew, she'd want you gone, you and Pip, the real heirs." Philippa's eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head. I didn't want any trouble. I just wanted to live quietly." Charlotte's voice was sharp. "This is nonsense. I'm Letitia Blacklock, and I don't know anything about Sonia's child." But her hands were shaking, and her eyes darted to the door like she wanted to run. Craddock stepped closer, his voice low. "We checked the records, Miss Blacklock. Letitia Blacklock died in Switzerland, 1941. You're Charlotte. You came back, took her name, and waited for Belle Godler to die so you could claim the fortune. But Schwez found out, and so did Dora." Miss Marple's needles stopped. "Dora was your friend, Charlotte. She knew you were Charlotte, didn't she? She called you Letty by mistake, and she talked too much about the old days. That's why she had to die." Charlotte's face crumpled, her voice breaking. "No, I didn't kill her. I loved Dora." Miss Marple's voice was gentle but firm. "But you killed Schwez, didn't you? You planned it all. The ad, the blackout, the gun. You hired him to stage a robbery, to scare everyone. But you shot him in the dark. You wanted it to look like he attacked you, so no one would suspect your secret." The room was silent, the air thick with shock. Patrick's eyes were wide. Julia's hands froze on the curtain. Philippa's tears fell silently. Mitzi gasped from the doorway, her spoon dropping to the floor. Charlotte shook her head, her voice a whisper. "No, no, you're wrong." Craddock held up a small vial, sealed in a plastic bag. "We found this in your room, Charlotte. Cyanide, same as in the sherry. And the lamp's cord. Your fingerprints were on the spliced wires. You cut it to make the blackout." Charlotte's shoulders slumped, her face grey. I didn't mean for Dora to die. The sherry was for me, to make it look real. Dora took it by mistake. And Murgatroyd, she remembered I wasn't by the fireplace when the lights went out. I had to stop her. Miss Marple's eyes were sad but steady. "You were desperate, weren't you, dear? You'd lived as Letitia for years, waiting for the money. But Schwez knew your secret, and Philippa's son was the true heir. You couldn't let it all fall apart." Charlotte's voice was barely audible. "I just wanted what was mine. Letitia was dead, and I was alone. The money was my chance to start over." Craddock stepped forward, his voice calm. "Charlotte Blacklock, you're under arrest for the murders of Rudy Schwez, Dora Bunner, and Amy Murgatroyd." Fletcher moved in, gently taking Charlotte's arm. She didn't resist, her eyes distant, like she was already far away. Patrick stood, his face pale. "Aunt Letty, Charlotte, how could you?" Julia's voice was cold. "She fooled us all. But why drag us into it?" Miss Marple's needles clicked again. "She needed witnesses, dear. The ad brought you all to watch, to make it look like an attack. But she didn't count on Miss Murgatroyd's memory, or Philippa's secret." Philippa wiped her tears, her voice soft. "I didn't want the money. I just wanted Pip to be safe." Miss Marple smiled kindly. "And he will be, dear. You're Sonia's daughter, and Pip is the heir. The truth is out now." As Fletcher led Charlotte away, the room felt lighter, like a storm had passed. Patrick slumped back in his chair, shaking his head. Julia let go of the curtain, her face pale but relieved. Mitzi ran to the kitchen, muttering about packing. Philippa sat still, her hands steady for the first time in days. Outside, the village was waking up, the grey sky softening with hints of blue. Miss Marple walked with Craddock to the police car, her umbrella tapping the ground. "A sad case," she said, her voice soft. "Charlotte wanted a new life, but she built it on lies." Craddock nodded, his face tired. "If it weren't for you, Miss Marple, we might have missed it. That business about Murgatroyd's memory, someone missing, it cracked the case. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Oh, I'm just an old lady who notices things. People talk, and I listen. And sometimes the smallest detail, like a lamp or a name, tells the whole story. Craddock smiled. You're more than that. Will you stay in Chipping Cleghorn? Not long, Miss Marple said, her needles clicking in her bag. Mrs. Lucas is feeling better, and my village needs me. But I'll visit again. It's a lovely place, despite everything. As the police car drove away with Charlotte, Miss Marple headed to the tea-room. Mrs. Harmon was there, her eyes wide with excitement. Jane, they're saying Charlotte Blacklock's the killer. She wasn't even Letitia. Is it true? Miss Marple sat, her smile gentle. It's true, dear. She was Charlotte, hiding as Letitia for the Godler fortune. But Philippa's son, Pip, is the real heir. It's all sorted now. Mrs. Harmon gasped. And you figured it out? You're amazing, Jane. Miss Marple's needles clicked. Just listen, dear. People always say more than they mean to. At Little Paddocks the house was quiet, but the tension was gone. Patrick and Julia sat in the drawing-room, talking softly about what came next. Philippa was in the garden, her hands in the dirt, a small smile on her face. She'd tell Pip the truth one day, when he was older. For now, she was free. Mitzi, still muttering, decided to stay. No more curses, she said, banging a pot. But I watch everyone now. In the village, life crept back to normal. The tea-room buzzed with gossip, but it was lighter, like a weight had lifted. Miss Hinchcliffe, grieving Murgatroyd, vowed to keep her pigs in her friend's memory. Tris, Swettenham and Edmund planned a quiet winter, far from murder. Miss Marple packed her knitting bag, ready to return to her village. As she walked to the train station, the sun broke through the clouds, warming her face. Chipping Cleghorn would heal, she knew. But she'd never forget the ad, the lamp, the sherry, and the woman who'd lied to escape her past. The train whistle blew, and Miss Marple stepped aboard, her mind already on her next visit. Somewhere, someone would need an old lady who noticed things, and she'd be there, knitting and listening, ready to find the truth. Chapter 11. A Quiet Farewell. The grey clouds over Chipping Cleghorn had finally parted, letting soft sunlight spill across the village. It was Wednesday, a week after Charlotte Blacklock's arrest, and the air smelled of fresh grass and baking bread. The village was slowly coming back to life, like a flower opening after a storm. 3 deaths: Rudy Schwez, shot in Little Paddocks, Dora Bunner, poisoned by sherry, and Amy Murgatroyd, strangled in her cottage, had left scars. But the truth was out and the fear was fading. The strange ad in the Gazette announcing a murder was just a memory now, a dark tale to tell over tea. Little Paddocks stood at the edge of town, its ivy-covered walls catching the morning light. Inside, the house felt different, lighter, like it could breathe again. The drawing-room's bullet hole was patched, the crooked picture straightened, and a new lamp stood where the tampered one had been. The silence that had choked the house was gone, replaced by soft voices and the clink of dishes. Philippa Hames sat at the breakfast table, her blonde hair loose, her face calm for the first time in weeks. She sipped her tea, a small smile playing on her lips. Her son, Pip, was coming home from boarding school soon, and she felt ready to tell him about his past, about Sonia Godler, his grandmother, and the fortune he'd inherit one day. She wasn't afraid anymore. Patrick Simmons leaned back in his chair, his grin back, but softer, less forced. "It's weird without Aunt Letty. Charlotte, I mean," he said, spreading jam on his toast. "I still can't believe she did it." Julia, Simmons, sitting by the window, nodded, her dark hair catching the sunlight. "She fooled everyone," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "But I'm glad it's over." This house was starting to feel like a prison. Mitzi bustled in from the kitchen, her apron clean, her dark eyes bright. "No more curses," she declared, setting down a plate of scones. "I stay now. This house is good again, but I watch everyone, just in case." She laughed, a sound that made the room feel warmer. Philippa looked up, her smile growing. "You're staying, Mitzi? That's wonderful. We need you." Mitzi shrugged, but her cheeks pinked. "Someone must cook, and I make best scones in village." The laughter that followed was soft, careful, like the first steps after a long illness. The house wasn't healed, not completely, but it was trying. Charlotte's lies, her desperate plan to claim the Godler fortune, had torn them apart, but the truth had brought them back together. Across the village, Miss Jane Marple walked, along the lane, her umbrella tapping the ground. The air was crisp, smelling of damp earth and chimney smoke. She wore her tweed coat and a neat hat, her white hair fluffy as a dandelion. Her eyes sparkled with quiet wisdom, taking in the village waking up, the baker's boy on his bicycle, the postman whistling, the curtains open wide. Mrs. Lucas was feeling better, her cold gone, and Miss Marple was packing to return to her own village, St. Mary Mead. But first she wanted to say goodbye. She stopped at the Bluebird Tea Room, where Mrs. Harmon waved her over, her round cheeks pink with excitement. "Jane, you're a hero," she said, pulling out a chair. "Everyone's talking about how you solved the murders. Charlotte Blacklock pretending to be Letitia. It's like a story." Miss Marple sat, her knitting bag in her lap, her smile gentle. "Oh, I just noticed things, dear. People talk and I listen. The police did the hard work." Mrs. Harmon leaned in, her eyes wide. "But you figured out Charlotte was lying. And Philippa, she's Sonia's daughter, isn't she? Her little boy, Pip, gets the Godler money now." Miss Marple's needles clicked. Yes, Pip is the true heir. Philippa hid her past to protect him, but the truth came out. It always does. Mrs. Harmon sighed. "Poor Dora and Murgatroyd. They didn't deserve to die." Miss Marple's eyes softened. "No, they didn't. Dora loved Charlotte, and Murgatroyd was just trying to remember. But their deaths helped us see the truth." She thought of Murgatroyd's last words. Someone missing from the room when the lights went out. That clue, small but sharp, had pointed to Charlotte, who wasn't by the fireplace when she should have been. And Dora's chatter about the old days had tipped Miss Marple off to Charlotte's secret. Even Schwez, the blackmailer, had played his part, though he'd paid with his life. At Little Paddocks, Inspector Craddock arrived, his coat unbuttoned in the warm morning. Philippa let him in, her smile shy but real. The household gathered in, the drawing-room. Patrick and Julia relaxed, Mitzi hovering with a tray of tea. Craddock sat, his face less grim than before. "I wanted to update you," he said, his voice calm. Charlotte Blacklock confessed. "She's Charlotte, not Letitia. Her sister died in Switzerland, and she took her name to claim the Gödler fortune. Rudy Schwedz found out and blackmailed her, so she hired him to stage a robbery. She shot him in the dark, meaning to make it look like he attacked her." Patrick whistled, shaking his head. "And Dora? Murgatroyd?" Craddock's jaw tightened. "Dora was an accident. The poisoned sherry was meant for Charlotte, to keep up the act that someone was after her. Dora drank it by mistake. Murgatroyd remembered Charlotte wasn't in the room during the blackout. She was tampering with the lamp or shooting Schwez. Charlotte strangled her to keep her quiet." Julia's voice was soft. "She was so calm, so kind. I never thought she could do it." Craddock nodded. "She was desperate. Years of living a lie, waiting for Belle Gödler to die so she could inherit. When Schwed's and Philippa's secret threatened that, she snapped." Philippa's eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. "I didn't want the money. I just wanted Pip to be safe." Craddock smiled faintly. "You and Pip are safe now. We've confirmed you're Sonia Gödler's daughter. The fortune will go to Pip when Belle passes, but you can live quietly until then." Philippa nodded, her shoulders relaxing. "Thank you. That's all I want." Mitzi set the tea tray down, her voice loud. "No more poison in this house. I check everything now." She grinned and the room laughed, the sound light and free. Craddock stood. "I'll check in again, but you're in the clear. Try to move forward." As he left, Patrick poured tea, his grin back. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his cup. Julia clinked hers against his. "And no more murders." Philippa smiled, her cup steady. "To Pip," she said softly. "Miss Marple visited Miss Hinchcliffe that afternoon, finding her in the garden, tending her pigs. Hinchcliffe's face was lined with grief, but her eyes were clear. "Miss Marple," she said, wiping her hands. "Heard you cracked the case. Murgatroyd would be proud." Miss Marple's smile was sad. "I wish she were here to see it. She was brave, remembering that night." Hinchcliffe nodded, her voice rough. "She kept saying someone was missing. I should have listened harder." Miss Marple's hand rested on her arm. "You did your best, dear, and her memory helped us find the truth." Hinchcliffe looked at her pigs, her voice softer. "I'm keeping them for her. She loved the silly things." Miss Marple nodded, her heart warm. She'd like that. As she left, she thought of Murgatroyd's nervous chatter, her kind heart. Some losses lingered, but the village would carry on, stitching itself back together. At the post office, Mrs. Finch leaned over the counter, her eyes bright. "Miss Marple, you're the talk of the town. Charlotte Blacklock, a killer. And Philippa, the real heir. It's like a book." Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking in her bag. "Life is often stranger than books, dear, but it's sorted now." Mrs. Finch handed her a letter. "For you, from Mrs. Lucas. She says, come back soon." Miss Marple tucked the letter away, her heart light. "I will, dear. Chipping Cleghorn's a lovely place, despite its troubles." She walked to the church, where Mrs. Harmon was arranging flowers. "Jane," Mrs. Harmon said, brushing dirt off her hands. "You're leaving tomorrow, aren't you? The village won't be the same without you." Miss Marple chuckled. "Oh, I'm sure you'll manage. "But I'll miss your tea and gossip." Mrs. Harmon grinned. "It's not gossip, it's news. Promise you'll visit again." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "I promise, dear, and if you need an old lady to notice things, you know where to find me." That evening, Miss Marple visited. Little Paddocks one last time. Philippa let her in, her smile warm. The drawing-room was cosy, the fire crackling, the new lamp casting a soft glow. Patrick and Julia were playing cards, their laughter easy. Mitzi brought tea, her muttering replaced by a hum. "Miss Marple," Philippa said, "thank you. If you hadn't figured it out, I don't know what would have happened." Miss Marple sat, her knitting bag in her lap. "You're kind, dear, but the truth always finds a way. You and Pip will be all right now." Patrick looked up, his grin real. "You're a wizard, Miss Marple. How'd you know it was Charlotte?" Miss Marple's needles clicked. "I didn't at first, but little things added up. Dora's talk of the old days, Murgatroyd's memory of someone missing, the lamp's tampered cord, and Charlotte's fear she was hiding something big." Julia set her cards down, her voice soft. "I feel bad for her in a way. She must have been so scared living a lie." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes sad. "She was, but fear doesn't excuse murder. Dora, Murgatroyd, even Schwez, they deserved better." Philippa's hand rested on Miss Marple's. "You gave them justice. Thank you." Miss Marple smiled, her heart warm. "Take care of each other, dear. This house is yours now." The next morning Miss Marple packed her suitcase, her knitting bag ready by the door. Mrs. Lucas hugged her, her eyes misty. "You're a marvel, Jane. Come back soon." Miss Marple chuckled. "I will, dear. Your cottage is too cosy to stay away." At the train station, the village seemed brighter, the sun warming the platform. The baker's boy waved, and Mrs. Finch called out from the post office. Miss Marple boarded the train, her umbrella in hand, her mind already drifting to St. Mary Mead. As the train pulled away, she looked out at Chipping Cleghorn, its houses neat and small. She thought of Charlotte, desperate and alone, building a life on lies. Of Philippa, brave and quiet, protecting her son. Of Dora and Murgatroyd, kind souls lost too soon. And of the ad that started it all, a cruel trick that unravelled a killer's plan. Her needles clicked in her lap, a steady rhythm. The world was full of secrets, but Miss Marple knew how to find them. Somewhere, someone would need an old lady who noticed things, and she'd be ready, knitting and listening until the truth came out. The train whistle blew, and Chipping Cleghorn faded into the distance. A village healing, a story closed. Chapter 12. A Village Reborn. The spring sun shone brightly over Chipping Cleghorn, painting the village in hues of green and gold. It was May, 6 months after Charlotte Blacklock's arrest, and the air smelled of blooming flowers and fresh-cut grass. The scars of last autumn's horrors, Rudy Schwez's shooting, Dora Bunner's poisoning, and Amy Murgatroyd's strangling, were fading, like old wounds under new skin. The strange ad in the Gazette, announcing a murder, was now a tale told with hushed voices, a story of fear that ended in truth. Chipping Cleghorn was healing, its lanes bustling with neighbours who smiled again, though their eyes still held a trace of caution. Little Paddocks stood at the village's edge, its ivy trimmed, its windows sparkling in the sunlight. The house was no longer a place of shadows, but a home filled with laughter and life. The bullet hole in the drawing-room was gone, plastered over and painted fresh. A new lamp, with a cheerful yellow shade, stood proudly on the side table, casting a warm glow. The memory of Charlotte's lies, her desperate plan to steal the Goodler fortune, lingered, but it was softer now, overshadowed by hope. Philippa Hames sat in the garden, her blonde hair tied back, her hands in the soil as she planted daisies. Her face was calm, her blue eyes bright with a peace she hadn't known in years. Her son, Pip, played nearby, chasing a butterfly, his giggles filling the air. Philippa had told him a simple version of the truth, that he came from a special family, and one day he'd have a big future. The Goodler fortune was his, but for now they lived quietly, free from secrets and fear. Patrick Simmons strode out of the house, his grin wide and real. He carried a tray of lemonade, his sleeves rolled up. "Pip, you little rascal!" he called, setting the tray on a table. "Come get a drink before you wear yourself out." Pip ran over, his cheeks pink. "Uncle Pat, look, I caught a butterfly, but I let it go." Patrick ruffled his hair. "Good lad, butterflies need to fly." Julia Simmons joined them, a book in her hand, her dark hair loose. She'd softened since the murders, her sharp edges dulled by time and truth. "You're spoiling him, Pat," she said, but her smile was warm. "He'll expect lemonade every day. Let him," Patrick said, pouring a glass. "Kid deserves it after all we've been through." Philippa wiped her hands on her apron, her smile soft. "We all do," she said. "This place feels like home again." Mitzi appeared at the garden gate, her apron spotless, her dark eyes sparkling. "Lunch, it's ready," she called, her voice loud but happy. "No poison. I check everything. Come eat, or I throw it to pigs." She laughed, a sound that echoed across the garden, making Pip giggle. "Mitzi, you're a treasure," Philippa said, standing. "Let's go in. Pip, wash your hands." As they headed inside, the garden buzzed with bees and birds, a sign of life returning. Little Paddocks was theirs now, a place to build new memories, free from Charlotte's shadow. In St. Mary Mead, Miss Jane Marple sat in her cosy parlour, her knitting needles clicking as she worked on a scarf. The spring sun streamed through her window, lighting up the roses in her garden. She wore a soft cardigan and a neat hat, her white hair fluffy as ever. Her eyes sparkled with quiet wisdom, her mind drifting back to Chipping Cleghorn. She'd returned home months ago, but the village and its secrets stayed with her, like a book she couldn't quite close. A letter from Mrs. Harmon lay on the table, full of news. Philippa was thriving, raising Pip with love and care. Patrick and Julia had stayed at Little Paddocks, helping Philippa make it a home. Mitzi was still cooking, her fear of curses replaced by pride in her kitchen. Miss Hinchcliffe was planting a garden in Murgatroyd's memory, her pigs thriving. The village was knitting itself back together, stronger for its wounds. Miss Marple smiled, her needles steady. She'd known Chipping Cleghorn would heal. People were resilient, even after betrayal and loss. But she couldn't forget Charlotte Blacklock, a woman who'd built a life on lies, driven by fear and greed. Or Dora, kind and chatty, dead by mistake. or Murgatroyd, strangled for a memory. Their deaths had led to the truth, but the cost was heavy. She thought of the clues, the tampered lamp, the poisoned sherry, Murgatroyd's words about someone missing from the room. Small things, but they'd unravelled Charlotte's plan. Miss Marple had listened, watched, and pieced it together, like a puzzle only she could see. It wasn't magic, just noticing what others missed. Back in Chipping Cleghorn, the village was alive with spring. The tea-room buzzed with chatter. The post office hummed with letters, and the church bells rang for a wedding. Edmund Swettenham and a girl from the next town. Mrs. Harmon was there, arranging flowers, her hands dusty, but her smile wide. She spotted Philippa in the churchyard, carrying a basket of daisies. "Philippa!" she called, waving. "You're looking well. How's Pip?" Philippa smiled, her face glowing. "He's wonderful, growing like a weed. Thanks for the books you sent. He loves them." Mrs. Harmon beamed. "Anything for that boy. And you, settled in at Little Paddocks?" Philippa nodded, her eyes soft. "It's home now. Patrick and Julia are like family, and Mitzi keeps us fed. I never thought I'd feel safe again, but I do." Mrs. Harmon squeezed her hand. "You deserve it, dear. After all that business with Charlotte." Philippa's smile faded, but only for a moment. It's strange, thinking she was Charlotte, not Letitia. I feel sorry for her in a way. She must have been so lonely. Mrs. Harmon nodded, her voice gentle. Miss Marple said the same. Said Charlotte was scared, hiding all those years. But it doesn't excuse what she did. Philippa looked at the daisies, her voice soft. "No, it doesn't. But I'm glad it's over. Pip's future is secure, and that's enough." At the tea-room, Miss Hinchcliffe sat at her usual table, a cup of tea in her hand. Her face was still lined with grief for Murgatroyd, but her eyes were brighter, her shoulders straighter. She'd planted a rose garden by the cottage, each bloom a tribute to her friend. The pigs were thriving, and she'd named the newest litter after Murgatroyd's favourite flowers, Daisy, Lily, Rose. Mrs. Finch bustled over, her apron full of crumbs. "Hinch, you're looking better," she said, setting down a scone. "Heard, your pigs won a prize at the fair." Hinchcliffe grinned, a rare sight. They did. Murgatroyd would have loved it. She'd be fussing over them, calling them her babies. Mrs. Finch patted her shoulder. "She's watching, I bet, and proud of you." Hinchcliffe nodded, her eyes on the window. "Hope so. I'm keeping her memory alive, one pig at a time." In St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple walked to the post office, her umbrella tapping the pavement. The village was quiet, its own dramas small compared to Chipping Cleghorn's. She'd received a parcel from Mrs. Lucas, homemade jam, and a note begging her to visit. Miss Marple smiled, tucking the note away. She'd go back one day to see the village in full bloom. At the post office, her friend Mrs. Blade handed her a letter from Inspector Craddock. "Miss Marple, you're popular," Mrs. Blade teased. "What's this one about?" Miss Marple chuckled, opening the letter. "Just a friend, dear." Craddock's note was short but warm. Charlotte was in prison, awaiting trial, her confession clear. Philippa and Pip were safe. The Godler estate lawyers working on their claim. Patrick and Julia were planning to stay in Chipping Cleghorn, maybe open a bookshop. Mitzi had started a baking class, teaching village kids to make scones. Craddock thanked Miss Marple again, calling her the sharpest mind he'd ever met. Miss Marple folded the letter, her heart warm. She hadn't solved the case alone. Craddock's work, Murgatroyd's memory, even Schwez's greed had played a part. But she'd seen the truth in the little things. Dora's slip of Letty, the lamp's frayed cord, Philippa's quiet fear. It was always the little things. That evening, Miss Marple sat in her garden, the roses glowing in the sunset. She knitted a blanket now, something for Mrs. Harmon's new baby, due in summer. Her mind wandered to Chipping Cleghorn, to the people she'd met, the secrets she'd uncovered. She thought of Charlotte, a woman who'd lost herself in a lie, driven by a dream of wealth. Her fear had turned to murder. But Miss Marple felt a pang of pity. Charlotte had been alone, her sister gone, her life a mask. Dora had loved her, but even that wasn't enough to stop her. She thought of Philippa, brave and quiet, hiding her past to protect Pip. Her strength had shone through, a light in the dark, and Pip, a boy with a future he didn't yet understand, would grow up safe, thanks to the truth. She thought of Patrick and Julia, young and flawed, but growing kinder, learning to care. Mitzi, with her loud voice and warm heart, had found her place. Hinchcliffe, carrying Murgatroyd's memory, was building something new. Miss Marple's needles clicked, a steady rhythm. The world was full of shadows, but it was also full of light. People made mistakes, hid truths, hurt each other. But they also healed, forgave, started again. Chipping Cleghorn had shown her that, and she'd carry it with her. In Chipping Cleghorn, the village gathered for a spring fair, the first since the murders. Stalls lined the square, selling jam, cakes, and knitted scarves. Children ran with balloons, their laughter ringing out. Philippa and Pip manned a flower stall, their daisies the prettiest in the lot. Patrick and Julia handed out lemonade, joking, with neighbours. Mitzi's scones sold out in an hour, her grin wide as she promised more tomorrow. Mrs. Harmon bustled by, her arms full of ribbons. "Philippa, this is lovely," she said, buying a bouquet. "The village feels alive again." Philippa smiled, her hand on Pip's shoulder. "It does. We're starting over." Hinchcliffe was there, her pigs on display, children petting them with glee. She caught Philippa's eye and nodded, a silent understanding. They'd both lost, but they were moving forward. As the sun set, the fair glowed with lanterns, music drifting through the air. The village danced, laughed, remembered. The ad, the deaths, the fear, they were part of the story, but not the end. Chipping Cleghorn was reborn, its heart beating strong. In St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple finished her blanket, folding it neatly. She'd send it to Mrs. Harmon tomorrow, with a note about visiting. Her parlour was quiet, the fire crackling, the roses outside dark against the evening sky. She thought of the ad that started it all, a cruel trick that hid a killer's plan. She thought of the lamp, the sherry, the scarf, small things that told a big story. And she thought of the people, good and bad, who'd shaped it. Her needles rested in her lap, her mind calm. Somewhere, another village might need an old lady who noticed things. She'd be ready, knitting and listening until the truth came out. For now, she was home, and that was enough. The stars came out, bright and clear, and Miss Marple smiled, her heart full.